Entering Apocalypse in Easy Mode. Chapter 101 Entering the Tower. In the White Room, as usual, Agatha was looking at them with amusement in her eyes. Or rather she just stared at Clyde and not paying too much attention for the rest. He handled it pretty well, Agatha muttered. She wasn't too shocked by what she saw. Because Agatha already knew that Clyde would be able to walk toward the tower easily. The skills he has are also quite extraordinary. Agatha remembered that the skill was called hacking. The fact that Clyde had that rare skill proved that he knew what was going to happen today. Agatha decided not to think too much about how Clyde knew about it all. And just enjoy the fun sight. Lucho's arrival surprised her. Agatha almost jumped off the couch when the door opened. "How's the situation?" Lucho asked. Nothing worth mentioning, Senior," replied Agatha. Lucho looked at the screen with serious eyes, then sat down on the couch. As soon as he sat down, Lucho immediately brought his hands together in front of his face, making a gesture of contemplating. But his eyes stare straight at the screen. There is no question about who is the center of his attention this time. "They're approaching the main control tower," Lucho said, astonished. "Do they know anything?" Lucho stared at Agatha with his sharp eyes. Agatha tried to be calm even though inside her heart, there was a turmoil of fear. "I'm not sure, Senior. I've seen him disappear when he was on the subway," said Agatha with a calm face. Lucho stared at him for a few more moments. His brows furrowed so sharply that it made the look in his eyes a few times more frightening. Agatha felt the urge to swallow her saliva. In the end, she swallowed reflexively, while hoping that Lucho wouldn't take it as a sign that she was nervous. Lucho then sighed and looked at the screen again. Agatha also breathed a sigh of relief silently. "The Guardians have come. So we don't have to worry about the Celestials trying to harm us," Lucho said. "That's good," Agatha said. "I will make another contract offer to him." Lucho looked at Clyde, who was fighting the drones on the screen. "Are you sure he will accept it this time, Senior?" "Why not? Doesn't he need something to fight the Outer God tomorrow?" Agatha did not answer. She had a hunch that Clyde already had a way to deal with that Outer God without receiving a contract from Lucho. What Clyde got from anyone he met when he disappeared on the subway is still a mystery. And that must have been a reward from the Celestial for telling him to kill those 3 Wendigos of different colors. So, it's definitely not a small reward. Clyde also asked her about the treasure box. Agatha didn't know what was actually in the treasure box because this system is quite old. So neither Lucho nor her have a complete manual. But if Clyde was looking for it, it would definitely be of use to him. There was even a high chance that he would find something to defeat the Outer God tomorrow. However, Agatha couldn't say that because it would make Lucho feel suspicious of her. Then thought that she was planning something behind him. Lucho and Agatha continued to watch Clyde and the other players in action in silence. Clyde was almost at the main control tower. But apparently, there is something else that appears and blocks him. Something that looks troublesome. It is a robot. But that shape gave off the impression that the robot's power was on a different level than it had appeared before. The robot didn't have the appearance of a metal human skeleton. Outwardly it looks like a human wearing futuristic armor with glowing neon red stripes. It holds 2 short swords. The swords were made of red energy condensed into blades. Its heads have a V-shaped curved line that seems to indicate the location of its eyes. Clyde used skill inspection on it right away. Monster information. Name, X99. Affiliation, Rogue AI Monster. Level, 40. Skills, Laser Beam, LV.5, Weapon Mastery, LV.6. Stats, Strength, 8/10, Stamina, 10/10, Agility, 7/10, Magic Power, /10. Weakness, Electromagnetic Field. Affinities. Rating, A, Very Happy Face, Tisk. Clyde clicked his tongue, full of annoyance. He thought he could get into the tower now that none of the drones were coming. But who would have thought that the tower still had something to guard against it? Suddenly the robot with the name X99 shot toward Clyde and swung the 2 swords simultaneously. Clang! Clyde is able to raise the Elder Glass sword in time to counter the 2 swords. The robot then uses its legs to perform an upward circular kick. Clyde was able to dodge it but barely. The robot's metal leg barely missed his chin. Clyde jumped back and then swung the Elder Glass sword in a forward arc. He sent out a crescent-shaped lightning slash like the one he used before to destroy the drones. But even though the lightning slash went so fast, the X-99 robot managed to avoid it by bending its back. The lightning slash just passed through it. X-99 immediately stood back up and dashed toward Clyde with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived in front of Clyde. X-99 again slashed the two swords from two opposite directions simultaneously, aiming it at Clyde's neck. Clyde threw a lightning bolt at the robot's chest. As soon as the lightning bolt hit its chest, X-99 was sent flying backward. JRZZZTTT. Asterisk. JRZZZTTT. Asterisk. JRZZZTTT. Asterisk. Bluish-white lightning flowed through the robot's metal body for a few moments, making it unable to move. Clyde used this opportunity to dart towards it and then grabbed its neck. Then Clyde slams it to the ground with such force that it creates a small crater. Then Clyde raised the Elder Glass sword and plunged it into the robot's chest. Crack! The Elder Glass sword's blade was still enveloped in bluish-white lightning, so that when the sword blade entered the body of the lightning robot, it immediately spread. X-99, which had previously looked like a threat, was now violently convulsing. Maybe if this robot fights other players it will indeed become a threat. But it was nothing in front of Clyde. Clyde stood up and let the robot convulse on the ground. He walked straight toward the gate of the main control tower. But Clyde's view remains the stay vigilante because maybe the tower still has a surprise in store for him. Boom! Clyde heard an explosion from behind him which made him turn his head. Behind them were flames rising from the toppled body of a large robot. Clyde saw Rodney come out from next to the robot and started attacking the other robots. Seeing that, Clyde was increasingly convinced that they would be fine. So he walked faster toward the gate. Clyde cut through the gate and barged in. Then he met with very high double doors. Viewed from anywhere this double door looks sturdy. Clyde felt he could destroy this door. However, he will release quite a lot of magic power. So it's not a wise choice. Clyde saw an electronic panel beside the door. Something that usually serves as a place for security card scanning. He stuck a hand there and activated his skill. Hacking, LV10, is activated. A second later the same notification appeared. Say you order. Open the door. FSSS. With that, the large double doors began to open to both sides. Clyde immediately ran in through the open gap without waiting for the door to fully open. As soon as he entered, what greeted him was a large and wide corridor. Clyde looked in all directions to make sure nothing was trying to attack him once he forced his way in. Suddenly the corridor light came on. It turns out, the corridor light is a red light that makes the entire corridor filled with red like blood color. The intruder alarm sounded. Clyde had expected this, so he wasn't surprised when he saw a dozen robots modeled after X-99 appear around him. They immediately attacked Clyde as soon as they saw him. Some wield two short swords like the X-99 he fought before, while others use long-range attacks with a gun. Clyde fought them while using skill, pure lightning. Flashes of bluish-white lightning danced in the middle of the corridor which was lit up in red. Destruction was created on several sides of this corridor. The body parts of the X-99 robot were thrown and hit the wall and then died and didn't move anymore. After a few minutes, finally Clyde managed to beat them all. He looked in all directions but found nothing that lunged at him again. So he continued his journey. Because of what Agata had said about the location of the treasure box, Clyde was able to walk with a clear purpose. 10th Division Office. Clyde read the neon sign over a double metal door. Clyde did the same. Sticking hands on the panel beside the door and using skill, hacking. Chapter 102 The Mini-Boss. The door opened by itself just like the main gate of this tower. Once again, skill, hacking proves its might. As soon as Clyde entered the room, it turned out to be quite a large room. The location on the first floor makes Clyde frown his forehead because usually, a room like this is at the top of the tower. There is still no movement whatsoever indicating that a robot will appear and attack him. But Clyde knows it's only a matter of time before the robots attack. There are several large monitor screen panels in this room with running text. Like what you usually see in films with a theme like this. The red light flashed dimly. Even though it lit up the room with blood red, the light was not as bright as what Clyde had seen in the corridor earlier. Based on what Agatha said, he would find a mini-boss with the name T-1000. Clyde was already facing X-99 whom he could beat easily because he could move so fast before they had the chance to use a troublesome skill. But he didn't know about the robot this time. Based on the name, this robot should be slightly stronger than X-99. Suddenly the monitor screens flickered quickly as if they had malfunctioned. Clyde immediately put himself on alert. That could be a sign that something was about to appear. Then the room shook violently. Clyde almost fell because suddenly the room was moving upwards. But soon he was able to balance himself again. Metal plates appeared and covered the walls. Bang! 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 The sound when the metal plates closed by hitting each other was very loud. And since it was a closed room, the sound was even more deafening. The room is now a metal box that keeps Clyde inside. This of course was part of the plan of whoever was waiting for him when the room stopped. After a few minutes, the room that had become a metal box suddenly stopped. All the monitors in this room turned off completely and then a door opened from above. From that door, a woman wearing tight black latex clothes jumped down into the room. The woman fell to her knees and her head bowed. She lifted her head slowly towards Clyde. A few strands of her jet black hair blocked her view. But that didn't seem to matter as her red eyes stared at Clyde. "This is T-1000. Clyde squinted as he stared at the woman. He had no idea why they had bothered to create such a fine female form. Did they intend to trick anyone who walked in here with her appearance? "Hi. The woman even greeted me with a smile. Clyde admits that she is beautiful. She also has a nice body. But that was completely useless because Clyde already knew she was a robot he had to beat. Monster information. Name, T-1000. Affiliation, Rogue AI Monster. Level, 45. Skills, Weapon Mastery, LV.6, Force Field, LV.6, Hypnosis, LV.5. Stats, Strength, 8/10, Stamina, /10, Agility, 8/10, Magic Power, /10. Weakness, Electromagnetic Field. Affinities. Rating, A+, B. This robot will be slightly more difficult than X-99. But Clyde still feels he can handle it. Perhaps what made it even more troublesome was that skill called Hypnosis. From the name, if you get hit by this skill, Clyde can get caught in a dangerous situation. The only way is to move fast enough so that the robot doesn't have time to use its skill. Just like what he did with the X-99 robots earlier. You have successfully found this room. So, Pure Lightning, LV.10, is activated. JRZZZTT. Before the robot finished saying it, Clyde had already lunged at it with his body covered in bluish-white lightning. In the blink of an eye, Clyde was right in front of it and immediately swung the Elder Glass sword which was also covered in lightning. However, the blade hit a red force field in the shape of a half-dome that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. "I knew you would do that," said the T-1000. A moment later the robot's hand changed to resemble a futuristic gun muzzle. Then it pointed it at Clyde. Clyde, who saw that, immediately jumped aside. The laser shot came out from almost hitting his chest if he didn't dodge it in time. As soon as Clyde was able to avoid the shot, he didn't take a break and immediately lunged back to a place that wasn't covered by the force field. But the T-1000 was already following Clyde with those eyes. Even when he was using skill, Pure Lightning, Clyde noticed the robot's eyes were following him. So it can see me at this speed. As soon as Clyde reached the part that was not protected by the force field, another force field appeared there. Just as he had expected. So Clyde jumped back to keep his distance for a while first. The T-1000 smiled. The robot's smile resembled a woman's smile. Totally realistic. "I already know how you move and how you attack. I've been watching you since you started moving towards this tower," the robot said. "I also already know what abilities you have." Clyde wasn't too shocked to hear that. It is a robot after all. So its ability to analyze must be very good. "You can't touch me as long as this force field is still there." The T-1000 can even characterize the emotion of someone who feels they have won. Even though what was behind that victorious smiling face was just metal. "Is that so?" Clyde asked back. "Yes," it replied. "You also can't go anywhere because this metal cage is extremely formidable. So you will just die here. In my hand." "Your robot brain really thinks you've won, hey?" Clyde asked back in an even tone. "I don't just think I've won. I know I've won." Clyde snorted. "I guess your robot mind can't make you think past your analysis." The T-1000 didn't change that expression. But Clyde seemed to be able to see that the computer's brain was trying to digest his words. Without giving it a chance, Clyde dashed with his body still covered in bluish-white lightning. Once again the dome-shaped force field appeared. Burning Hand, LV-10, is activated. Clyde let out a burst of fire towards it. Instantly the fire formed a wall that blocked its vision. The T-1000 moves its eyes to scan the area in front of it. But never found Clyde because of the wall of fire. Clyde appeared behind him a moment later and immediately swung the Elder Glass sword. Unfortunately, the T-1000 was moving fast enough to stop the blade. Crock! Even though it couldn't completely stop the slash, it could at least prevent Clyde from chopping off its head. Clyde clicked his tongue and then sent a fireball into the robot's face. Whoosh! The fireball exploded in the robot's face and sent it flying backward. T-1000 immediately activates a force field in front of its body to prevent Clyde from attacking it. However, unbeknownst to it, Clyde is already behind it. Crock! The Elder Glass sword stabbed the robot's back until it penetrated its chest. The crunching sound of metal being shattered rang out as it did. "You can't predict my movements if you can't see me, can you?" Clyde said with a grin. However, it turns out that the T-1000 is not that easy for him to destroy. The robot turned its head 180 degrees and stared at Clyde with glowing red eyes and a face that looked full of rage. Its face, which originally looked beautiful, has now disappeared to be replaced by a horrible facial appearance. The T-1000 then opened its mouth very wide. Much wider than an ordinary human. Then a cannon formed in that mouth. A hissing sound appears indicating that the robot is gathering energy for its blast. Clyde immediately drew the Elder Glass sword. However, the sword stuck in the robot's back. Shit! Reluctantly, Clyde had to let go of the Elder Glass sword and roll away. JYUU! Asterisk. The cannon in the robot's mouth fired. The reddish cannon that shot out cut the top of Clyde's hair a little. T-1000 moves its head towards Clyde, who is running to dodge. The laser grazed the metal wall that confined them. The metal wall was strong enough that the lasers only created long, deep scratches. Luckily Clyde still activated skill, pure lightning, so he had no trouble dodging the laser. The Elder Glass sword was now trapped in the robot's body. And it was clear that the robot would not have given up the sword even if he asked for it nicely. Burning Hand, LV-10, is activated. This situation forced Clyde to keep using his skills. It made him quite worried. If only he could use all of his stat points to strengthen himself, the robot wouldn't be a problem for him. Flames flared in Clyde's hands. While lightning enveloped his entire body. He dashed while dodging the T-1000's laser shot. Chapter 103 Close 1. Clyde sprinted fast. Lightning enveloped his body and gave him strength and speed many times over. The T-1000 continues to fire lasers from the cannon from its mouth. The robot's red eyes watched Clyde's every move and refused to let him escape its sight. The robot also started repairing its body that had been pierced by the Elder Glass sword. It pulls the metal from the metal plate floor under its feet. When the metal plates enter its body, they bond with it in a smooth motion. A few moments later the wound on the robot's chest closed tightly. The T-1000 is now able to move again. The cannon in its mouth disappeared and it closed again to form normal human lips. Clyde used the opportunity to get closer. Because it no longer fired lasers, Clyde's opportunity to move was getting wider. Now the robot creates two weapons in its hands. A gun in the left hand and a laser sword in the right. It lunged at Clyde with great speed. Clang! The robot's laser sword hit the blade of the Elder Glass sword. Then T-1000 raised the gun in his left hand to Clyde's forehead. JYUU! Laser shot coming out of the muzzle of the gun. The shot would have created a hole in Clyde's head if he didn't dodge it in time. But Clyde can duck fast enough to avoid the shot. He threw a fist at the robot's stomach. However, a force field appears suddenly and blocks Clyde's fist. Clyde felt his fist hit a hard wall. The T-1000 is now about to aim the gun at Clyde's head again. But Clyde had already grabbed his hand and sent a wave of bluish-white lightning through it. The lightning propagates quickly to the robot's body. The T-1000 had a bit of a convulsion. But it didn't take long for it to launch another attack. Doug! The T-1000 butts Clyde's head and sends him backward. Then pointed the gun at him. However, Clyde realized that quickly. He used his leg to do a spinning kick and kicked the gun away. JYUU! The shot that should have hit Clyde was off the mark. Clyde landed perfectly after executing the spinning kick and threw a big fireball at the robot. Boom! The T-1000 was thrown backward into a wall. Clyde frowned because it didn't seem like he had time to use its force field to protect itself. There was something different since Clyde managed to stab his sword into the robot's body. The robot somehow reacts a bit slower than before. T-1000 got up again and looked at Clyde with a robotic face similar to the angry look of a human. Clyde on the other hand was grinning where he stood. What do you think? Are you still convinced that you can win now? Clyde was almost sure that the robot was now maximizing the calculations in its brain to recalculate its chances of victory. However, Clyde won't let the robot count for too long. He, with his body still covered by the bluish-white lightning, dashed at full speed toward the robot. In the blink of an eye, Clyde was already in front of it. He didn't directly slash the Elder Glass sword as usual but instead fired a lightning bolt from his left hand. JRRZZTTTT. The lightning bolt hit the robot's stomach. A split second later the new force field appears. But it was already useless because Clyde's attack was already connected. It turns out what I suspected was right. The robot is slower now. Being cornered, the T-1000 opened its mouth again and took out the cannon. Clyde, who had expected it to do that, immediately thrust the Elder Glass sword into its open mouth. Now the point of the sword is in the mouth of the robot. Clyde poured a large amount of lightning into its mouth. JRZZZTTTT. Asterisk. The robot's body vibrates and convulses violently. Its eyes widened as it looked at Clyde as if it was in great shock. Seeing that, Clyde grinned evilly. Maybe it's nothing more than just one of the many human expressions that have been registered in the robot's brain. The T-1000 didn't take that as a sign that it would meet a horrible end. Suddenly the T-1000's eyes lit up even brighter and sent a signal into Clyde's eyes. Clyde was unable to avoid the T-1000's ability, which was quite dangerous. He felt like he had lost all power in his body. The stream of lightning that was previously flowing strongly dimmed and finally disappeared. The lightning in Clyde's body went out along with all of his senses. Shit! Hypnosis! Clyde fell on the metal floor. His Elder Glass sword tumbles beside him. He sat up with a dazed and lost expression. His eyes were empty and stared into nothingness. Meanwhile, the T-1000 also fell onto the metal floor. The robot's body was still convulsing because of the massive lightning stream that was still present inside its body. The state of the robot was the same as Clyde's. It couldn't move for a while, so used its skill, hypnosis, to save its life. The two of them are now in the metal box cage with conditions that are not much different. But the T-1000 still has its awareness, so it can still try to repair itself. The robot immediately pulled the metal plates around into its body. The process was slow because the lightning that Clyde released was still in its body and slowed down its entire performance. On the other hand, Clyde is still affected by the hypnotic signal sent by the T-1000. The signal affects his brain so that it turns off its function for a few moments. Clyde couldn't think of anything right now. His entire head felt empty as if it had sunk into a void. He could no longer even feel fear or anxiety. What Clyde saw right now was only the form of the robot repairing itself by pulling the metal plates around it with blank eyes. After a few minutes passed, the lightning on its body started to dissipate. Its convulsing stopped because the part of its body that was damaged by the lightning was fixed. T-1000 stood looking at Clyde with cold robotic eyes. The expression on that human-like face was no longer there. All that's left now is the cold metal that wants to kill Clyde. Even though its body couldn't stand straight because the fixing process wasn't perfect yet, it was enough to kill Clyde with an empty mind and a body that couldn't move in the slightest. The robot got closer and then raised its hand, which was still trembling. But unexpectedly, Clyde's eyes, which were blank a few moments before, shifted at it. Doug! Clyde kicked the robot's leg, causing it to fall to the metal floor. Then he grabbed the Elder Glass sword that was not far away from him and thrust the sword into the robot's head. Croak! The sound when the metal of the robot's head was penetrated by the tip of the sword, was something satisfying for Clyde. A notification text was still floating in his vision when he saw the robot dying beneath him. Private Attribute Effect activated. Private Attribute, Easy Mode, has reduced the effect of skill, hypnosis drastically. Clyde was able to come back from the hypnosis effect, which almost took his life, at the right time because of that. Now things are turning around so quickly. He, who was on the verge of death, had now managed to land a heavy hit on the T-1000. Clyde didn't stop there to ensure his victory. Pure Lightning, LV-10, is activated. Lightning appeared and flowed through the Elder Glass sword into the robot's body and shattered the metal organ it had just repaired. Moments later the T-1000's body parts fell apart one by one. Then the sinister gleam in those eyes also started to dim. Those eyes stared at Clyde emotionlessly until they completely died out. The robot's entire body stopped moving, which is a sign that the robot is dead. Clyde drew his Eldgar glass sword and breathed a sigh of relief as he stood up. You gain 3,000, x10, EXP. You leveled up. You leveled up. You leveled up. Level up notification appears multiple times. Clyde didn't count exactly how many times he had level up, but he could tell that he had leveled up quite a lot. The EXP he got after defeating this mini-boss was quite a lot, coupled with the effect of skill, EXP plus, the EXP he got was very plentiful. Bang! 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 The metal plates opened against each other a moment later. The room returned to normal and Clyde could see again the door he had entered. He walked towards the door and opened it. Then found himself in a black corridor lit by blue neon lights. Soon a mechanical sound was heard in the corridor. You have succeeded in killing the T-1000. Your reward has been provided in the main control room located at the end of this corridor. After hearing that, Clyde walked to the end of the corridor and opened the door there. Chapter 104. A thought. Clyde stepped into the room. When he got inside, it turned out that the atmosphere of this room was much different from what he had seen before. This room wasn't made up of metal walls or red neon lights that seemed to convey the sinister vibe of an evil AI. Large windows lined the length of the room, and from those windows, Clyde could see what was outside. A computer with one monitor screen and keyboard is in the middle of the room. On the monitor screen, there was a blue text that was blinking as if asking Clyde to come closer. Main controls. So Clyde walked over to the computer. Once he was directly in front of it, the text on the monitor changed. Press enter. Clyde immediately did it. The writing on the monitor changed again. You now have full access to all AI in this tower. Clyde grinned. Then he started typing the commands he wanted to give to all the robots in this tower. Clyde orders the remaining X-99s to finish off other robots on the streets and help his group members. Then he also ordered the drones to do the same thing once they were ready. From the window, Clyde looked down the street. It turned out that he was currently on the top floor of the main control tower. He saw his group members still in the middle of the robot siege. They can survive well, but the seemingly endless number of robots will still be something dangerous if left alone for a long time. Then a dozen human-shaped robots with amazing abilities came out from inside the tower. They were rushed to the troops of the robots and began to carry out their actions. That is destroying the robots on Clyde's orders. After seeing that, Clyde nodded in satisfaction. He returned to the computer and typed something. He wanted to quickly get the treasure box hidden in this tower. After he typed in the command, the floor in front of the computer opened. Then a platform rises to 1 meter. Above the platform was a black box with a blue neon stripe lighting up on the side of it. Clyde drew closer to the box. Because he was sure that it was the treasure box he wanted, Clyde didn't hesitate to open it right away. He pressed a large button in the middle of the top side of the box. The box opened to 4 different sides and revealed a grey orb inside. The orb was only the size of his palm. Clyde took the orb and stared at it for a few moments. As far as he could observe, the orb showed nothing special. The shape is plain and smooth. Out of curiosity, Clyde used his skill, Inspection, on the orb. Inspection, LV3, is activated. Item information. Name, Nightmare Orb, Replica. Affiliation, Godly Essence Replica Item. Item grade, S. Description, this item stores the fragment of a powerful outer god power. With the power within this item, you can have the ability to injure outer gods. Clyde's eyes widened slightly when he saw the information about the item he was currently holding. Grade S item. Clyde had never seen an item or weapon of this grade before. That meant that he was currently holding an item of the highest grade in this selection stage. But seeing from the ability of this item, Clyde wasn't too surprised that this item was in grade S. However, there was something that made Clyde feel confused. What does it mean that this item is a replica? Clyde muttered in surprise. Does that mean this item is just a copy of the original item? The quiet room made Clyde think more clearly. If this was all just the selection stage, then the possibility that everything here was just an imitation was indeed quite high. Since day one, the parties running this apocalypse, most likely the World Masters, have indeed only issued one mainstream apocalypse scenario after another. They're just copying what's already created in fiction. This selection stage is just a big stage where they are a spectacle for all beings who see it. Whether they are world masters, celestials, or some other being. Maybe all of this isn't real. Maybe they will wake up on the 6th day when this apocalypse ends. Because everything in this world is just an imitation. Then, are all these powers also unreal? Clyde stared at the reflection of himself in the window. He was now wearing all black, with a sword hanging from his waist. All the power he has, the coins he has. Is it all real? Or actually, he's just a pathetic teenager hoping to become the protagonist of a cool fiction story. But in the end, he just had to accept the fact that he was actually nobody. Clyde decided not to think about it anymore. Because that would only make him feel bad. So Clyde looked away from the window pane that reflected his appearance. Clyde put the nightmare orb into his inventory. Then cast his gaze around the room once more. The room is empty except for that lonely computer. Clyde concluded that there was nothing else he could do in this room. After all, he also got what he wanted. Clyde ran to the window and jumped out. He broke the window as if it was nothing. Then jumped down from the top floor of this tower. Clyde felt a gust of wind against his face as he dived down from several tens of meters high. For a moment he felt calm when he did that. In his mind came a thought. Perhaps this is the last sight people who commit suicide by jumping off buildings see and experience. Clyde landed on the ground with a thump. He landed on his feet easily, unharmed. Above him came a rustling sound. Clyde looks up, he sees the drones have been released and is now helping the X-99s to destroy the robot troops. With their help, the waves of robots that continue to spawn without stopping are much easier to handle. The other group members are also aware of the presence of robots and drones that help them. The X-99 is superior to ordinary robots. And the drones that attacked from above were also barely touched by their attacks. So the drones can attack freely and destroy robots quickly. Clyde came to help shortly after. And the process to destroy the robots was running more smoothly. After about an hour had passed, they were finally able to beat all the robots in this wave. So they can feel a bit relaxed for some time. The members of the group stood in the middle of the scattered and piled up corpses of the robots. This place was suddenly like a scrap metal shelter. Sonia set him over the corpse of a large robot whose body had been cut in half. In her hands is still the futuristic rifle that she stole from the robot that attacked her at the motel. The others were already sitting on the corpses of the robots with tired faces. Apart from the scattered corpses of the robots, what caught their attention were the human-looking robots wearing modern armor and the drones that were silently hovering above. They stood still when there were no more robots for them to kill. The players in Clyde's group had already seen how the robot worked. They destroy the robots with their excellent fighting skills. Behind the robots, Clyde appears, who seems to be walking casually. They saw him walking from the direction of the main control tower. "You guys all right?" Clyde asked while looking at their condition. "Yeah, we're more or less all right," Sonia said. Others have given similar answers to her. "You managed to take over these robots and drones in the main control tower?" Rodney asked. "Yes." Clyde nodded curtly. "Let's get ready. The new wave is coming soon, right? If this squad of robots and drones helps us, it will be easier to get through these robot waves," said Reed. There was a faint smile on his tired face. "Whatever you do in that tower, you do a good job, Clyde," Eric said to Clyde. "Thanks," replied Clyde. "But today isn't over yet. Don't thank me just yet. They can only rest for a short time. Because not long after that the new robot army started spawning again. We'd better avoid being surrounded now," Rodney said. "I agree," Clyde said. They decided to find a good place to face the robot. Being in the middle of a siege and being attacked from all sides is very tiring. They entered a nearby building. Even though the robots can still enter, at least by being in this building they can minimize the number of robots that attack them at once. They felt they could fight better now. Now that Clyde had found what he was looking for, all they had to do now was hold on until the time the boss appear. Chapter 105 A Cyborg. They survive the robot attack for several hours. Destroys wave after wave of robots that keep coming without stopping. Hours that are heavy and quite tiring passing by. They could finally take a breath after the wave of robots stopped. But they know that the wave of robots will only stop for a while. So they can't afford to feel too relaxed. They were now on the highest floor of the building. Here, they can more easily withstand the swarm of robots below. Sonia now held a rifle in her hand, then another rifle that she slung across her back. And the two pistols hanging from her waist. All that she got from the robots she just killed. Her rifle that she used from the start had run out of battery after killing hundreds of robots. So Sonia had to find a replacement for the rifle and another backup weapon. From the top of the building, Sonia dominates by firing her rifle non-stop. None of the laser beams that shot from the muzzle of the futuristic rifle missed. Assisted by the drones and Robot X-99 that Clyde managed to get to help them, their task becomes much easier. Even so, their fatigue level still increased because the robots kept coming without stopping. If they were just regular players, who didn't have the advantage of high levels, they would have already died a few hours ago. What's the time now? Sonia asked anyone who could hear her. It's already 04:00 p.m., who answered her question was Isksa. The only ones free enough to take her time because everyone's pretty busy. After hearing that answer from behind her, Sonia looked up. She saw that the sun was already lower than the last time she saw it. This fight was so intense that Sonia didn't realize that they had spent that long. The boss should have appeared by now, right? Sonia asked while continuing to shoot. Clyde, who was fighting against the robot that was trying to climb up the stairs, didn't answer. Because he didn't feel that the question was directed at him. Clyde, so Sonia called him again. I don't know about that. Clyde answered in an equally loud tone. Ah, shit. Sonia cursed angrily. If Clyde, as someone she expected to know a lot of things, didn't know anything, then who could know when the boss would appear? Sonia's anxiety is shared by the rest of the group. But in the end, they can only wait until that time comes. They continued to fight the robots for a few more minutes. The sun was getting lower now. It's almost dusk, yet the boss still hasn't appeared. Over time, this made their minds even more agitated. Because normally, the boss appeared when the sun was still quite high. This wave of robots is over. They sighed again while stretching the sore body parts. Then not long after, their anxiety disappeared when a notification sound rang in the sky. Chapter 3, Time of the Machines. Progress, the cyborg called as the ultimate weapon has been activated. Kill the cyborg to end the chapter. Objective, the cyborg is the boss. Kill the cyborg to complete chapter 3. Finally! Sonia exclaimed. Why are you happy? You didn't hear the robot's nickname. Reed answered from beside her. At least now we can see the end of this chapter, right? Sonia replied to Reed's words. Yeah, I guess you're right, said Reed. In the midst of this exhausting and seemingly endless situation, seeing that the boss had appeared could be said to be some kind of hope. Even knowing that they were going to be up against a strong foe made them more relieved. This apocalypse had turned their feelings that way. A bright light appeared at the top of a building. The light was coming from an orb that looked like it was made of lightning. The orb is quite large. It was 2.5 meters in diameter and lightning whipped around it. Soon the orb began to crack like an eggshell being opened. The form of a man was visible from within. A few moments later the orb completely disappeared, leaving behind a man wearing all black who stood towering 2 meters tall. The man had long blonde hair and has big and tall build. His black outfit made him even more intimidating. His black coat fluttered in the wind. The man looked down at his hands and grinned. I'm back, he said, with a happy tone. On the other hand, the group members who were staring at the man looked wary. They could see the look on his face because the top of their building wasn't too far from him. That's the boss. I clearly remember how his form and strength were, Rodney said. He still has a human mind. But his body has been completely modified into a robotic organ. So he can still talk like a normal human. It doesn't matter whether he can speak like a normal human or not. We already know he is the boss, so we just have to kill him, Clyde said as he walked forward. He also talked a lot, Rodney added. Clyde didn't respond because he didn't think it mattered. The robot is aware of their existence. He turned towards them still with a smile on his cheerful face. Hi! Are you the survivors that I have to kill? The man shouted at them. He also waved as if all he just said was a warm greeting. Sonia snorted at the way he spoke. I could already tell he was an annoying person when he was human. Clyde turned to her. You can shoot him now, right? Oh right. Sonia raised her rifle and started aiming. Jyuu. Without waiting for a long time, she immediately shot the cyborg. The red laser shot at incredible speed toward the cyborg. However, the cyborg just didn't seem bothered. The laser fired by Sonia only hit the force field around his body. Whoa! Don't you guys want to chat first? The cyborg said. Sonia lowered her rifle. Even though her shot didn't have any effect, Sonia didn't look disappointed because she had expected that the cyborg wouldn't be hurt that easily. Sonia shrugged her shoulders. So he has a shield that seems to keep working all the time. Clyde, who stared at the cyborg, could be certain that he was using the same skills as those of the robots he had previously fought. Skill, force field. It's just, this time, the cyborg activates the skill all the time. Or it could be that his reactions are too fast, so it seems that he activates the skill all the time. Are you ready to die by my hand? The cyborg asked again in that unnaturally cheerful tone. He seems to be quite an annoying opponent. Mona was already staring at the cyborg with clenched jaws. We don't need to bother replying to his words, right? Eric said. Clyde intends to approach him. He stepped up and prepared to jump into the building. However, the cyborg jumped first toward them. He ejected his body after kicking the roof of that building. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the cyborg had landed in front of Clyde and immediately swung his fist. Clang! Clyde parried the fist in time with the Elder Glass sword. He didn't feel any significant pressure from the fist to the point where Clyde thought he could hold it with his bare hands. Ha ha ha! You're pretty strong, said the cyborg. Clyde sighed. The attitude of this cyborg looks like that of a very strong villain, who is praising his opponent he is sure he can beat if he puts out his full strength. Suddenly, from next to Clyde, Reed and Mona came simultaneously swinging their swords. Clang! The cyborg blocked the swings of the two swords with its hands. There was a sound of metal against metal when the swords hit his hand. Clyde could see the surprised look on the cyborg's face. Perhaps he had not thought that there was anyone who could give him such strong resistance in the first place. Clyde then sent a kick to the cyborg's face. Doug! The cyborg was blown far back and fell. He doesn't seem as strong as the Devourer, Clyde said. Yeah, I think so too. Reed agreed to his comments. Don't let your guard down. He hasn't used all his strength yet, Rodney said. Clyde turned to him. Are you saying that you're not confident you can beat him with your current level of power? Rodney looked back at him and then grinned. No. I'm sure we can still win. I just said we shouldn't let our guard down. Hearing that, they all smiled serenely. Maybe what makes this third chapter difficult is the swarm of robots that never stop fighting them. As for the matter of the boss, it seems that the boss isn't an enemy that's too hard to deal with. Chapter 106 His Memory. They looked down. Below there, they see a crater. That shows how heavy the cyborg's body is. So that the fall alone can create a crater like that. Clyde thought that he would be able to defeat the cyborg very easily. He has skill, hacking, which is a bane for AI rogues like him. Even when he's not completely robotic and still has human consciousness, aren't all his limbs and organs already become a machine? Clyde was sure that he could easily take over all of the cyborg's body parts. And when his skill, hacking, couldn't work for some reason, Clyde could still just beat him until he died. I'll leave him to you, Clyde said. His words provoked the glances of the rest of the group. Are you sure? Sonia asked. You don't want all the rewards from him. Even Sonia only considered the cyborg who was the boss as a source of rewards. It's no longer a threat. For now, yes, answered Clyde. Maybe I'll join the fight if I see something interesting. Actually, I'm not going to complain about that, Reed said. If you don't want to, I think we can handle it. You all seem to underestimate that guy. In the middle of the conversation that seemed too relaxed, Rodney said. That cyborg might look weak to us now. However, he's quite troublesome when he's transformed. Clyde turned to Rodney. Are you the only one who knows about that? Only I knew how to kill him in our previous turns, Rodney replied. Is it true? Clyde asked while looking at the other regressors. Yes. Mona nodded. We just hid and left everything to Rodney. Clyde's forehead furrowed when he heard her confession. Clyde wanted to ask again. However, they had been talking for too long and forgot about the figure of the boss that was down there. The cyborg was already jumping toward them at an incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of them, slashing his two laser swords. Swish! The sword slash was so powerful that it made a sound as it sliced through the air in front of them. Fortunately, the players had already jumped up with equally incredible reflexes before the sword had cut off their necks. Sonia aimed and then immediately shot. Jyuu. 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 Sonia didn't just shoot once. She fired her rifle many times until it seemed that there was no pause. Her slender finger squeezed the trigger non-stop. Yet, the cyborg can avoid all of those attacks by jumping and running on the roof of the building. Rodney turned to Eric, Reed, and Mona. Through the look in his eyes, they could tell that Rodney was indicating for them to rush forward. Reed, Eric, and Mona nodded. Then they approached the cyborg who was running around with a smiling face. As if thinks that everything that is happening right now is something entertaining. Ha 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 ha. Let's play. The cyborg changed its hands which were previously laser swords into cannons. He aimed at the four regressors who were running towards him with their swords drawn. Jyuu. 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 Shot after shot from the cannons in his hands shot off and hit the roof of the building. But none of them could hit all four of them. The shots had a big enough impact on the building they stepped on. In a few moments, many large explosions were created until the building was in a state of near collapse. It forced them to change spots. Clyde, Sonia, and Mona moved to a location that's a bit further out. Meanwhile, the four regressors continued to engage in the fight with the cyborg. You really aren't going to get involved in these fights? Asksa asked Clyde who was next to her. Clyde didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the regressors. He recalled the earlier conversation that had taken place between them. Mona says that they only hid when Rodney killed the cyborg in a past life. Rodney also said that he knew how strong and how to kill the cyborg. Meaning most likely, Rodney was the one who had the most knowledge even among the regressors. Let's just observe for the moment, Clyde said after a while. Hearing that, Asksa did what Clyde said. She didn't know what was going through Clyde's mind and what he meant by observing them. But like before, Asksa chose to obey Clyde. What Clyde wanted to know was how Rodney fought. If he knew a lot, it meant that he could fight easily, and it also meant that there is a huge possibility that he knew a lot more things. His friends don't seem to know that Rodney knows the robot's weakness. They seemed so confident in Rodney that they didn't question his decision at all. I think we should act too, Clyde said when he realized that he can't let Rodney be too strong. Clyde was convinced that Rodney knew about a lot more things. He couldn't let him gain more EXP. Or Rodney could have a big advantage. His words were heard by Sonia and Asksa. When? Sonia asked, instantly. As if she had been waiting for him to say that. Clyde turned to Sonia. Then to Asksa. They also seemed to see him as someone they can trust to follow without questioning anything. Was it because he had saved them? Perhaps that was also the reason those regressors followed Rodney without hesitation. You guys just follow me when I move, Clyde said to them. Asksa, you didn't use skill attack up on them earlier, did you? Asksa shook his head. No. Good. Clyde nodded. You can use it on me when the time comes. All right, Asksa said. Clyde felt a small happiness when he saw the two girls following him and willing to support him. Unknowingly, a small smile formed on his lips. Once again, Clyde feels that having a companion isn't a bad thing. Boom! A huge explosion suddenly created in front of them. Flames soared into the sky along with black smoke. From within the flames, the figure of the cyborg flew out with a wide grin on its face. You guys really entertain me, the cyborg said. The cyborg then landed on top of a house. Clyde, Sonia, and Asksa drew closer to take a closer look. The cyborg already had several wounds on its body. His all-black shirt was torn in several places with cuts. It was most likely caused by the regressors' sword slashes. However, he seems calm. That was because all the injuries he had suffered from those cuts had disappeared. His synthetic skin closed again the moment the wound landed on him. Clyde could see that the cyborg would be a tough opponent because of its regeneration ability. Well, after all, he was the boss on the fourth day, so they could be expected that his power would be this strong. Then the cyborg turned his head, noticing the presence of Clyde, Sonia, and Asksa. Hey! Don't you want to play? The cyborg asked them. Sonia clicked her tongue. TCH. He pisses me off. There's no point attacking him now because we still don't know his weaknesses, Clyde said. Yeah, I know. That pisses me off even more. How are those regressors doing? Asksa asked while looking at the puff of fire. Not long after, the four regressors shot out of the flames and headed straight for the cyborg. The cyborg himself seemed to be looking at them with an excited grin. Clyde waited for Rodney to reveal his weakness. They didn't take long to reach the cyborg. Once they were around him, they immediately attacked the robot with extraordinary ferocity. The regressors' blades clashed with the cyborg's metal arms. Then a cyborg shot a laser from his eye and almost pierced Mona's chest if she didn't block the laser with her sword. The laser shot pushed Mona several meters before finally stopping because Eric slashed the sword at the cyborg's neck. Yet, the sword only hit the metal that was under the skin of his neck. Then from below Reed slashed his sword toward the cyborg's chest. Clang! Once again the sound of metal clashing violently rang out. Reed's sword was able to pierce the cyborg's human skin, however, it stopped again by the metal layer beneath his skin. Rodney was already behind the cyborg. The cyborg glanced back with a grin as if he was expecting his enemy's futile efforts. However, Rodney did not slash his sword or attack in any way. Instead, he just kept quiet and stared at the cyborg for a few moments. Then Rodney said, "Do you still remember how your mother died?" The cyborg's expression suddenly changed when he heard those words leave Rodney's mouth. His eyes widened instantly, and his face was deathly pale. Rodney glanced at Eric and Reed, then nodded. The two of them then united to give a kick at the cyborg simultaneously. Doug! The cyborg was thrown backward, broke through the wall of a house, and ended up inside that house. None of this went unnoticed by Clyde. Clyde's eyes narrowed at the scene in front of him. Chapter 107 Decision to Join. Clyde noticed the change even though it had only happened for a split second. Clyde's eyes still narrowed sharply at the scene ahead. What did he whisper? Clyde could notice the minuscule lip movement Rodney made. Although the others didn't seem to notice as they focused on other things. The cyborg blew all the rubble out of the house that was collapsing on him. Then he stood on the rubble of the destroyed house, looking up at the regressors. His face was not as cheerful as before when he each thought this was all something fun. The cyborg now had a sour face. His mood dropped many times after hearing Rodney's whisper. Oh. The cyborg walked slowly towards them. What did you say? Eric, Mona, and Reed turned to Rodney. Eric and Reed, who were near Rodney, heard what he said. But they didn't really understand how those words could make the cyborg caught off guard and become a bit weaker than it should be. They didn't know about it because they were just hiding. And let Rodney deal with the cyborg. Rodney stepped forward confidently. As if, he is sure that he already has a clear advantage that will make him win. Didn't you hear what I said? I'm sure you did, though, Rodney replied in a calm tone. How did you know about my mother's death? The cyborg replied to Rodney through gritted teeth. Rodney grinned. That doesn't matter. What matters is that I know you were the one who killed your mother. Rah! Suddenly, the cyborg screamed as it charged toward the regressors. Get ready! Rodney said to his regressors' friends. The cyborg and the regressors were once again engaged in battle. Meanwhile, Clyde and the others were still staring from a distance. Sonia had also stopped giving them support fire as she was waiting for Clyde's orders. Clyde himself was still standing still as he was still observing the behavior of the cyborg and how Rodney fought against him. After a while, Clyde could conclude that the cyborg's movements had become more reckless after Rodney had whispered something to him. However, even though its movements have become more reckless, it does not mean that the cyborg has become weaker. He was still as strong as before, and the attacks from the regressors still didn't deal any significant damage to him. But Clyde guessed it was only a matter of time before the cyborg showed his weakness. If Rodney kept whispering those words, the cyborg's movements would become more reckless and he would eventually make a mistake. Whatever it is, I have to prevent Rodney from killing him and gain more experience. I don't care even if it looks like I'm licking my own spit. I can't let him have a better advantage than me. Clyde pulled the elder glass sword from its scabbard. Seeing that, Asksa and Sonia turned their eyes to him. Are we going to act? Sonia asked excitedly. Yeah, answered Clyde. What will we do? Asksa asked. Clyde turned to Asksa. You will provide support and healing as usual. Asksa replied with a firm nod. She looked like a loyal warrior who had just received an order from a king. Then Clyde turned to Sonia. You don't need to keep shooting. Just wait until the cyborg seems caught off guard enough that he can't activate his force field. All right. Sonia nodded. Let's go. Clyde dashed towards the fight with Sonia and Asksa following behind him. The cyborg was still putting up a tough fight for the regressors. With a metal body that feels he looks almost invulnerable. The cyborg also activates the force field at certain moments to repel their weapons and then counterattack. The combination of those two things alone gave the regressors a hard time. The cyborg still didn't even issue another type of attack. And Clyde still remembered that Rodney had mentioned something about transformation. That sounds like something serious. The cyborg turned his gaze towards Rodney. He ignored the other regressors as if they were insignificant backgrounds. You don't know anything about me, the cyborg screamed with rage. He swung both hands that had turned into laser swords towards Rodney simultaneously. Due to his predictable movement, Rodney could already predict that the cyborg would do that. So he ducked his at the right time. Swish! The two swords cut through the air in the void that had previously been Rodney's head. While Rodney had ducked below and thrust his sword toward the cyborg's neck. Crack! Different than before, this time Rodney's attack didn't just hit the metal layer like before. He knew that one of the most vulnerable parts of the cyborg's body was in the middle of his neck. It's just a small gap that is very difficult to hit. Because of that, Rodney was only able to hit that part now when he was so close and in the right position. Rodney grinned. Then before the cyborg could continue its attack, it rolled over and jumped away. And sure enough, as soon as Rodney got away, the cyborg let out a shockwave that blew everything around him. Debris and dust flew up as they were blown away by a powerful invisible force. There was an electric spark that appeared on the cyborg's neck where Rodney stabbed him. Indicates that Rodney's attack can cause damage to him. The cyborg realized that too. However, he seemed unable to do anything about the situation. So, he could only stare angrily at Rodney. Everyone present there was aware of it. Including Clyde, Sonia, and Isksa, who are still on their way to approach. Reed turned to Rodney to ask what he had just done. But the cyborg had already lunged at him so fast that it thwarted Reed's intention to ask. Clang! The cyborg's laser blade once again clashed with Rodney. This time the cyborg attacked faster and stronger. Driven by his accumulated anger. Reed, Eric, and Mona also came to help attack the cyborg. But now the cyborg is not as stupid as before. He immediately activated the same shockwave he had sent out earlier to blow them away. He immediately grabbed Rodney's arm before he was blown away. Because the cyborg seems to have already set Rodney as the main target and wants to get rid of him as soon as possible. Argh! Rodney screamed as he felt the pressure from the shockwave the cyborg emitted. And because he didn't get blown away like his friends, Rodney suffered an even greater impact from the shockwave. The shockwave was so strong that it sent Rodney's leg up. He also felt his head dizzy and his vision became blurry. Blood started coming out of Rodney's nose, which couldn't take the pressure of the wave. Shit, I'm going to pass out in a second. Rodney felt very apologetic. He fell into this situation because he was caught off guard. He thought that he could handle the cyborg easily because his level was already high and because he knew the cyborg's weaknesses. When Rodney felt that he was really going to faint in a few seconds, bluish-white flashes appeared in his vision. Then Rodney's body fell and he was taken away by someone. Rodney fell to the ground in a dizzy state. Clyde stood facing the cyborg who was about to charge toward Rodney. On his body, the bluish-white lightning was dancing rapidly. Get out of my way. I have to kill that guy now, the cyborg shouted angrily as he pointed at Rodney. Clyde didn't answer. Instead, he dashed towards the cyborg. Because of his speed, the cyborg even looked shocked when he saw Clyde already in front of him. Clang! 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 Slash after slash of the elder glass sword struck the metal lining and the cyborg's laser sword. The layer of lightning that was on the blade spread from the point of impact to its surroundings. The cyborg felt the effects of the lightning starting to interfere with its movements. Once again he used the shockwave to throw Clyde away from him. Clyde of course immediately shot away when he saw the signs that the cyborg was about to use his shockwave. The cyborg used its shockwave and knocked dozens of objects around it. But they failed to hit its target, which is Clyde. As soon as the shockwave finished, the cyborg still focused its gaze on Rodney. While Isksa is trying to recover his condition next to him. Clyde glanced at Rodney. The shockwave turned out to have quite a terrible impact to the point where Rodney became like that. I guess the boss on the fourth day really can't be underestimated, Clyde thought. But if I can use up all the stat points I have, this boss won't be a problem. The cyborg gnashed his teeth while staring at Rodney. Then he ran towards her even though it was obvious that Clyde was still not far from him. So, Clyde took the opportunity to lunge at the cyborg. Chapter 108 Transformed. The cyborg's eyes, which previously only focused on Rodney, were now aware of Clyde's presence, who suddenly lunged at him. He gritted his teeth even harder. Stop bothering me, you annoying fucker. The cyborg swung his arm at Clyde. From that hand came several sharp blades that immediately shot toward Clyde with incredible speed. However, Clyde's body, which was still covered in lightning, indicated that he was still activating skill, pure lightning. Thus, the speed of the blades wasn't a big problem for him. Clyde skillfully moved the Elder Glass Sword to block all the blades the cyborg threw. Then he continued to continuously dash towards him. Clang! In the blink of an eye, Clyde was right in front of the cyborg with the Elder Glass Sword pointed at his neck. But the cyborg still managed to cross his arms in time to block the thrust of the sword. Clyde could see very clearly a spot on the cyborg's neck that seemed to be sparking electricity. The spot also looks open. Unlike other parts of his body which are covered by a layer of metal. From there Clyde could already think that the spot on the neck was the cyborg's weakness. He didn't know if that part was his only weak point, or if there were other parts. But at least now he knew where to point his sword. Realizing that Clyde was aiming at his injured neck, the cyborg looked furious. "You think I'm going to let you stab my neck like that, you jerk?" the cyborg said with an angry tone. "I will cut off your head and tear your body into pieces. Then I will do the same thing to all your friends." Clyde did not reply to his words, which only contained angry curses. Instead, he opened his palm in front of the cyborg's face and then sent a bolt of lightning into his face. "JRZZZTT. Argh fuck!" the cyborg screamed. He had lost sight of Clyde's figure for a while. The cyborg also reflexively used the hand he previously used to block the Elder Glass Sword to remove the lightning bolt from his face. The time window that lasted only a fraction of a second was enough for Clyde to move to gather strength. He gripped the handle of the Elder Glass Sword with both hands, then thrust the blade with all his might into the spot on the cyborg's neck. Croquet! Swoosh! Elder Glass Sword managed to stab into that spot. Then a bluish-white lightning energy shot out through the back of the cyborg's neck until it hit the part of the building behind him. The cyborg's movement stopped for a few moments. Clyde also stopped to wait to see if the attack had the effect he was hoping for or not. Even though he had managed to penetrate the cyborg's neck with his stab, Clyde felt that the cyborg wouldn't be defeated with just such an attack. And turns out to be true. After a few seconds passed, the cyborg's hand turned into a cannon. Then he pointed the cannon at Clyde. Obviously, Clyde immediately drew his Elder Glass Sword and jumped aside to dodge it. Zhiuuu! The shot from the cannon went straight to where Clyde's head had been. Luckily, Clyde was gone from there. Once there was no longer any sword at his neck, the cyborg's head was knocked downwards. The light in his eyes dimmed but didn't disappear completely. But he's not dead. That was proven by the shot he just fired. On the other hand, Rodney has become much better than before. All of that is thanks to Isk's extraordinary healing abilities. Rodney stood up and looked at the cyborg and then at Clyde. He realized what had just happened. Clyde managed to deliver a clean attack on the cyborg from the wound he had just inflicted. However, the success of the attack would only be the beginning of the cyborg's transformation. Because that attack had killed the cyborg's basic form, the second form would appear in a moment. "He will transform," Rodney called out to Clyde. Clyde turned to him with a frown. "So he will start his transformation now." Rodney said that the cyborg would become stronger after its transformation. But Clyde was quite confident that he could still handle the cyborg even though he had transformed. The cyborg's body began to convulse. Then sparks of lightning appeared around him but did not come from his body. The spark seemed to appear suddenly from somewhere else. The sparks turned into the same 5 orbs that appeared when the cyborg came. Then, from the 5 orbs appeared parts that immediately joined the cyborg's body. Bang! 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 All the parts that seemed to have been sent from another dimension came together and reshaped the cyborg's body. Now, he looks like a robot knight soaring 4 meters high. Twice the height of his previous height. The newly arrived parts formed black armor with red light highlighting the arms, legs, and head. The armor envelopes his body and provides protection that looks powerful. Not only armor, but the newly arrived parts also turned into a spear-shaped weapon in his hand. Clyde concluded that the new parts also repaired the damage he had suffered from the attack. Everyone who was there stared in awe, except for Rodney, who knew that it was going to happen. "Hey, you said we can beat him even if it's a bit of a hassle?" Sonia asked Rodney. "Yeah. I believed in it and still believe in it," Rodney said. "Don't worry. Now he might look very strong. But there are 7 of us." Sonia decided not to worry anymore. Because even if she were to worry, it would be of no use. Clyde was still right in front of the cyborg. He who had not had the chance to use skill, Inspection used it now. Inspection, LV3, is activated. Monster information. Name, Cyborg Mark I, transformed. Affiliation, Rogue AI Monster. Level, 43. Skills, Laser Beam, LV.7, Weapon Mastery, LV.7, Shockwave, LV.8. Stats, Strength, 9/10, Stamina, 10/10, Agility, 7/10, Magic Power, /10. Weaknesses. Affinities. Rating, A, B. Clyde didn't see too much difference from the T-1000 he had fought earlier. Even the T-1000 seemed more troublesome because of that skill, hypnosis. But the cyborg in front of him didn't have that skill. But that armor looks pretty tough, though. The cyborg stared at Clyde through the red eyes that shone under the helmet. Clyde could feel the animosity that was so clear from his gaze. The cyborg used its spear to point at Clyde. You. The cyborg said in his previous voice but added a mechanical voice. I'll kill you. Clyde clicked his tongue. You should try harder with those words. The cyborg was about to make a threat, but the threat didn't feel like it had any impact on Clyde. The cyborg started to charge toward Clyde while swinging its metal spear. Suddenly, from the 2 points of the spears, lasers appeared and condensed to form 2 spearheads. But then, from behind him, Rodney came jumping while raising his sword. He didn't just give an ordinary sword slash but instead sent skill, sword slash. The black crescent-shaped sword slash shot towards the cyborg's back. It turned out that the cyborg had noticed the attack coming because he had looked back. However, he couldn't dodge because now his speed was reduced. Clang! The sword slash was stopped by the cyborg's thick armor. Yet, even though it couldn't penetrate it, Rodney's sword slash had created quite a deep scratch on the armor. Upon seeing him, the cyborg shifted its attention from Clyde to Rodney. He turned his body and then thrust his spear toward Rodney, who was in the process of landing. Jyuu. 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 However, shot after shot came in an instant toward the cyborg's hand and spear. The shot made the spear miss its target, which is Rodney. Because of that, Rodney managed to land well. He then used the opportunity to temporarily get away from the cyborg. Meanwhile, Eric, Reed, and Mona also attacked him from various sides. The cyborg realized that, but due to their extremely fast movements and reaction speed which had been greatly reduced after the transformation, the cyborg was too late to use its shockwave. The 3 regressors also immediately sent skill, sword slash towards the cyborg simultaneously. The blackish sword slashes hit the cyborg's neck, back, and stomach. Creates a pretty deep wound. The 3 of them immediately jumped back as soon as they finished sending that melee attack. The shockwave they had been expecting from the cyborg came out a moment later. However, the regressors had disappeared from the wave's range. At that moment, Clyde approached Rodney and asked. Now where is the weakness? Rodney shook his head. Unfortunately, now he has no weakness. Clyde looked up with a frown. What do you mean? Then how do we defeat him? We just have to attack him enough times until his armor breaks. Only then will his true core be revealed and we can truly kill him. Chapter 109 almost done. Based on what Rodney had said, they now only had one plan. Which is to attack the cyborg until his true core is revealed. Okay, Clyde said calmly. If that's what it has to be done, we just have to do it. Rodney and the others who heard it were astonished. How could Clyde be so calm? But then they got rid of their astonishment. From what they could see earlier, they could be sure that Clyde was able to act that calm for a reason. The cyborg stood towering and stared at them. The red light that was on his head shone toward all the players as if scanning them one by one. Hey, you can't get him off guard with the words you just said. Reed asked Rodney. No. Earlier, that man still had a bit of human consciousness. However, now his mind has been controlled by the program so he has no emotions, Rodney answered. Reed sighed. Okay then. Let's just attack him. Said Reed, who had given up. The cyborg dashed towards them. His steps sounded loud and created a small vibration around. The cyborg seemed to no longer want to give them time to talk to each other. He swung his spear and pointed it forward. From the point of the spear, a reddish orb shot toward them with incredible speed. Jyuu. 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 The shot from the spearhead came rapidly toward the players. They immediately scattered so the orbs that the cyborg shot just hit places where they had been standing. Clyde was the first to strike. He shot straight at the cyborg while his body was still covered in bluish-white lightning. The cyborg had clearly also noticed Clyde's arrival. He turned and pointed his spear directly at Clyde. He fired a laser large enough that it looked as though a laser pillar was emerging from the tip of the spear. Clyde was able to dodge the shot easily. For him, the speed at which the cyborg fired his attacks was not a problem at all. The laser shattered the ground Clyde had been standing on as he ran from the side. Clyde then swung the Elder Glass sword and sent a slash of lightning toward the cyborg. While his attack shot toward the cyborg, Clyde also dashed at full speed toward the cyborg. Until it was as if he was racing against his lightning slash. The cyborg raised his spear to block Clyde's lightning slash. Clang! Wush! When the slash hit the spear, a shockwave spread around, blowing up trash and debris. Unfortunately, the lightning slash lasted long enough that the cyborg had to keep using his spear, or else the slash would hit him. This was used by the others to launch attacks. The regressors moved together to slash their swords so they could continue to damage the cyborg's armor. Meanwhile, Sonia also kept shooting at the scratches or dents left by the regressors. All of this took place in a fraction of a second. But because of Clyde's lightning slashes which lasted long enough, they were able to land more hits than they should. In addition, the effect of Isk's skill, Attack Up, also helps them to create great damage. The lightning slash finally disappeared after the cyborg knocked it away with its spear. Then the cyborg spun its spear around to chase away the regressors around it. Clyde immediately took part as soon as he saw that the cyborg could move freely again. The cyborg's brain now had indeed changed into a computer brain, analyzing the situation quickly. Eventually, the cyborg decided that the biggest threat to it among his attackers was Clyde. Even though the human brain inside was still screaming that the person he should kill first was the man who said he was the cause of his mother's death. For now, his mechanical organs were clearly more obedient to his computer brain than his emotionally useless human brain. The cyborg ran towards Clyde. Clyde ran towards him while holding the hilt of the Elder Glass sword with both hands. Once they were within close range, Clyde made a stabbing motion as he had before. Then sent a shot of powerful lightning toward the cyborg who was charging toward him. The cyborg used his spear to block Clyde's lightning laser-like attack. Because of that, the footsteps that had been running toward Clyde stopped in place. Clyde turned to the rest of the group. He didn't need to say anything because they already knew what to do. They immediately lunged back and attacked the cyborg from all directions with even greater ferocity. Clang! 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 Swords and a barrage of laser shots hit the cyborg's body. Increases the number of wounds on his armor. Even some parts of the armor had fallen to the ground, unable to withstand the barrage of their relentless attacks. The cyborg received a notification that the resistance of his armor was decreasing rapidly. The cyborg immediately used a shockwave to blow all the attackers around him away. The shockwave also sent Clyde back a few meters. Luckily he was still able to gain good footing. Meanwhile, the cyborg didn't move immediately. He spread his gaze around at all the players swarming him from all directions. All the players there began to believe that what Rodney said at the beginning was true. They would have a bit of a hassle when facing the cyborg. However, they will still be able to defeat him. We can't stop now, Rodney said as he ran ahead of the others toward the cyborg. The others immediately followed him. Seeing them coming back to him, the cyborg immediately ran and jumped toward a building. He then landed on the top of the building and stared at them. Clyde immediately followed him. He didn't care even if the cyborg planned to provoke him to separate himself from the others. The cyborg also jumped again to keep his distance. Clyde was still following him with his body still covered in lightning. Clyde caught up with the cyborg in no time with his speed. He immediately slashed the Elder Glass sword which the cyborg blocked with the spear. Burning Hand, LV10, is activated. Feeling that he had not dealt enough damage, Clyde immediately activated skill, Burning Hand, and aimed for the part of the cyborg's armor whose outer layer had been peeled off. The flames entered the cyborg's inner body through the gaps in his chipped armor, increasing the damage level on the cyborg even more. The cyborg and Clyde then fight atop the tall buildings. Explosion after explosion was created, the damage spread as they kept moving throughout the fight. The rest of the group followed up. Sonia was about to shoot to help Clyde. However, he couldn't get a proper shot due to the debris and their fast-moving speed. I don't have a shot, Sonia said, shaking her head. Don't worry. We'll be able to take over from here, Rodney said. Let's go. The regressors immediately took that as a cue. So they followed Rodney, who shot toward the fight. Clang! 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 The sound of impact as the Elder Glass Sword's transparent blue blade covered in lightning struck the cyborg's metal spear echoed around the area. Clyde's face was calm as he swung the Elder Glass Sword with steady strength and speed. His attacks cornered the cyborg until he finally entered a floor of a tall building and the two of them fought in an office room. Clyde already knew that victory was near. He just needed to give the cyborg a little more encouragement. However, he can't afford to be off guard like before. The regressors followed shortly after. They entered the office and started attacking so that it accelerated the cyborg's damage process. Clyde and the regressors attacked simultaneously from all sides. The cyborg that had already taken quite a lot of damage was now even more cornered. His speed and strength decreased drastically. His armor wore away more and fell on the floor of the office. Doug! Then Clyde delivers a kick that instantly sends the cyborg through a window and he falls down. Clyde didn't say anything and immediately followed him. The other regressors automatically also ran. Clyde jumped down. Because they were previously on a fairly high floor, when Clyde came out the cyborg had not yet reached the bottom. Clyde immediately threw lightning bolts and lightning slashes at the cyborg. All the attacks hit him and pushed him down even faster. Boom! The cyborg hit the ground with a loud crash and craters were created all around it. Clyde held the hilt of the Elder Glass Sword with both hands as he continued to descend. Until finally, he landed on top of the cyborg's body while thrusting the Elder Glass Sword into his chest, which was no longer protected by his armor. Clyde as well continued to channel lightning through the Elder Glass Sword into the cyborg's body. The cyborg's body convulsed and bluish-white lightning shot out through the gaps in the armor. Chapter 110 Another Transformation. Lightning flashed through the gaps in the broken armor, slapping out as if wanting to rebel from within the cyborg's body. Clyde continued to stream his lightning for a few moments and didn't want to end it until the cyborg showed signs that he was dead. After a few moments passed, the head of the cyborg that had been continuously convulsing stopped. Then his red eyes glanced at Clyde, who was above him. Those eyes lit up even brighter and made a distinct hissing sound. Clyde widened his eyes. This is a clear sign of impending danger. Clyde immediately drew the Elder Glass Sword and then rolled away. That's when the laser beam shot from the cyborg's eye came out. If Clyde didn't leave in time, the laser would have hit his head. The rest of the group arrived around Clyde seconds later. They stared at the cyborg who was trying to get up. Metal limbs were growing from his back. The metal limbs looked like spider legs and immediately moved to lift his body. After that, the metal limbs moved quickly, carrying the cyborg's body away from that place. He's going to run away, Reed shouted. Don't worry. He can't get too far, said Rodney. Clyde moved to catch up with the cyborg without saying anything. All the group members immediately turned their eyes on him because Clyde was standing out with the lightning surrounding his body. I still remember him saying not to interfere, Rodney remarked while looking at Clyde. Isn't that great? With him here, we can beat the cyborg faster, Sonia answered his words. Yeah, I guess so, said Rodney. But why did he suddenly change his mind? What are you guys doing? We have to catch up with him, Asksa said. Asksa's words made them all realize and immediately rushed to catch up with Clyde and the cyborg. Drake! 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 The limbs that look like spider legs stick into buildings and make the cyborg look more like a spider crawling over the walls of buildings to escape. The condition of his armor also looks worse than before. Several strands of lightning were still visible on the cyborg's body. Then the further he crawled on the buildings, the armor part fell because he was no longer able to sustain the damage after the damage he had suffered. The cyborg seemed to be hanging on by a very thin thread. Even after undergoing the transformation, he still couldn't stand against the strength of his attackers. The cyborg's eyes caught Clyde's very conspicuous arrival. The lightning that surrounded him looked so bright in the middle of the night. The cyborg's computer brain repeatedly shouted a distress signal. Clyde's arrival made all the systems in his body alert. But what can the cyborg do? The attacks from Clyde and all the players attacking him simultaneously were much stronger than he could handle. All the contracts he had made with that red-haired girl were now meaningless. He has given up all his body to be cut open and turned into a robot with the promise that he will get enough strength to avenge his mother. But, what did he get now? He was almost killed by the attacks from players who should be weaker than him. Grrrhh. Fuck all of this. The cyborg suddenly stopped. He is now attached to the wall of the building with his metal spider legs. His eyes glanced at all the players who were chasing him. This situation seemed to say that he was prey and all players were predators who could eat him at any time. No, the cyborg can't allow that. The computer system in his brain kept telling him to run as far away from them as possible. However, the cyborg insisted on staying and fighting. Betrayed all the systems in his body that kept him alive. The rage bubbling up in his human brain took over the computer brain that was trying to say that now was the time to run. All the armor on the cyborg's body changed shape again according to orders from its human brain. They were no longer the armor that protected his body but turned into various kinds of weapons linked to the metal limbs. Swords, axes, shields, rifles, and spears, are all around the cyborg's body. The weapons were within close reach. But it also left the cyborg's naked main body exposed clearly. On his neck, there was still a gaping wound caused by Rodney and made worse by Clyde. Rodney frowned. What the hell? Why did he suddenly open his body before his armor was destroyed? Asksa turned to Rodney. This hasn't happened before. No. Rodney shook his head. Previously I had to wait for the other players to sacrifice themselves to destroy the armor. There shouldn't be another transformation after that. The reason Rodney was able to defeat the cyborg in his previous turns was that he made use of several players weakening the cyborg's armor. At that time, 4 players attacked the cyborg desperately until they finally died at the hands of the cyborg. It was then that Rodney took the opportunity and killed the cyborg, then killed the dying players. But now, it turns out that things are going a bit differently than the previous turns. Rodney turned to Clyde. Was it all because of him? Clyde's presence creates several changes in the selection stage due to his strength that exceeds the scale. Maybe the cyborg was triggered by Clyde's power and felt that he should be aggressive now. If so, that's a good thing. By turning its strongest defense into a weapon, the cyborg was no longer protected. Even if his attack power had increased many times, that wouldn't make any difference to the fate that would befall him with the presence of the 7 of them delivering attacks together. Clyde only glanced briefly at the rest of the group. Without saying anything else, they already knew what they had to do. Hray-ah! The cyborg let out a scream from his ravaged throat. So that the sound that comes out of it sounds like a combination of human screams in pain and a malfunctioning machine. The cyborg catapulted itself toward Clyde. Sword in the left hand, and rifle in the right hand. He fired the rifle at Clyde while closing in. Clyde is deflecting all the lasers heading his way. Then the cyborg landed in front of him and immediately swung his sword. Clang! Clyde felt that the power behind the sword swing was stronger than before. He wondered if it was because of the anger that seemed to be burning inside the cyborg. Clyde could also see the cyborg's eyes full of anger and pain. He couldn't be 100% sure of what he was seeing at this moment, especially when they were engaged in an intense fight. It's just, if indeed it is anger and pain, that means there is still a human mind left inside that cyborg. Is he just a monster that was created to be a boss in this chapter, or a human that was tricked into being forced to become a boss? Clyde didn't know which was right. Suddenly he became curious and intended to ask Agatha that later. For now, any answer about identity is irrelevant. Because he just had to kill him. They fought hand to hand for a few moments until finally, the others started to join in the fight. Shots from Sonia came first to start their arrival. The cyborg can still raise one of the shields he controls through the metal limbs so that Sonia's shots fail to hit him. But then Eric and Mona came from the side of the shield with incredible speed. They slashed their swords simultaneously at the metal limb holding the shield. Crock! The shield fell to the ground as the metal limb holding it snapped. After that, from behind them both Rodney and Mona sent out their blackish sword slashes simultaneously. Clyde is still there! Asksa screamed. Indeed, Clyde is still involved in close combat with the cyborg. And the 2 black sword slashes shot toward the cyborg and Clyde. He should be able to dodge it with ease. Rodney replied to Asksa's shout. Unfortunately, Rodney's words are not entirely true. Although in the end, Clyde was able to avoid it, he didn't do it easily. Clyde managed to jump to avoid it. However, the tip of the sword slash hit his waist. Even though the injuries he sustained were not too severe due to the protection of the Dark Knight coat, he still suffered from one. Due to that slash, Clyde also spun in the air and finally lost his footing. Crack! Clyde's foot landed at an odd angle and he was sprained instantly. Bang! Bang! Another sword slash hit the cyborg. Because of that, his attention was diverted to the regressors who were attacking him. Fortunately, with his stats maxed out, Clyde can be freed from the sprains in an instant. However, the wound on his waist was still there because it came from a skill with a maxed level. Entering Apocalypse in easy mode. Chapter 111 Last Wish. Shit. Clyde cursed through gritted teeth. He felt a stinging pain from his waist. He didn't expect that he would get injured by a member of his group. Such things had never happened before when they fought. Clyde can't help but think, is this intentional by Rodney or not? His suspicious nature made him immediately think of such a possibility. Clyde glanced at Rodney, who was fighting the cyborg with the rest of the group. He was seemingly indifferent to his situation and continued to fight without even glancing in his direction. While Clyde was looking at Rodney with various speculations in his head, Asksa came to him with a worried face. "You hurt?" Asksa asked. Clyde immediately turned to her with a slightly surprised expression. "Yes, a little." Clyde immediately showed his waist, which was bleeding a little. Asksa immediately tended to the wound without further speaking. A green light that creates a cool feeling comes out from Asksa's hands that are close to her waist. It didn't take long for his wound to heal. Now there was only a 5 cm long cross-cut hole in his clothes. Clyde's skin that had been cut there was completely covered. "This is the first time I've ever gotten this badly injured," Clyde said. Even though it wasn't actually a serious wound that was life-threatening, what Clyde said was true. Until now, that was the only serious wound he had suffered because it could make him bleed. "It's okay now." "Thank you," Clyde said to Asksa with a slight smile. Asksa returned the smile with a slightly wider smile. "Now, you can join the fight again." "I think so." Clyde walked towards the fight that was happening up ahead. Then he turned to Asksa as if remembering something. "You'd better go back into hiding now," Clyde said. Asksa nodded. "Don't worry. I already understand what I have to do." Clyde nodded again. He felt no need to worry about Asksa anymore. After that, Clyde ran to re-enter the fight he had left. When Clyde left, the damage received by the cyborg was less than before. The cyborg even managed to land an attack on Mona, who then threw her quite far from the rest of the group. The cyborg swung 2 laser swords simultaneously at Eric, who was closest to him. Clang! With quite a heavy struggle, Eric managed to block the swings of the 2 swords with his light shield. Even though the 2 swords were swung not by the cyborg's actual hands but by their metal limbs, the force behind the swings was significant. Reed arrives to strike the metal limbs and save Eric. However, a large axe came towards him from behind the cyborg. Clang! Reed was forced to cancel his intention to help Eric because he had to block the axe with his sword. Because of that, he was also pushed back. Rodney also immediately came to help. But then missile fire rained down on him from the cyborg's rocket launcher, which was also controlled by metal limbs. That made him unable to move closer to help Eric. Even Sonya's shots from afar are not very useful because the cyborg activates a force field which immediately counters Sonya's shots. The cyborg was fixing its attention on the players now in front of it. His eyes were still burning with anger and wanted to kill them without leaving as soon as possible. However, the cyborg didn't notice that Clyde was running toward him at full speed. This time, Clyde had not activated skill, pure lightning, because he felt that the cyborg was weaker. Moreover, he was surrounded from all directions. Another reason is also that Clyde wants to conserve his magic power. Clyde came from behind. As soon as he felt he had gotten enough distance, Clyde swung the Eldralghast sword. Clang! But there was still a spear that suddenly appeared in front of him to block his sword swing. It was as if the metal limbs had their own consciousness to move the spear. Because of that, the cyborg noticed Clyde's presence. He turned and immediately pointed his rifle at Clyde. Only then did Clyde feel that it was the right time to use his skill. Pure Lightning, LV10, is activated. Clyde threw a lightning bolt at the rifle and changed his aim so that the shot was far off. The attack seemed to have damaged the rifle as well. There were electrical sparks appearing on the rifle. The cyborg diverted his attacks to Clyde so that Eric was free from his pressure. Reed and Mona had also returned to the battle. The force field that protects the cyborg from Sonya's shots has also shrunk. Clyde's arrival distracts the cyborg from them. The cyborg seemed to act impulsively as soon as he saw Clyde's arrival without thinking too much about everything. The cyborg's desire to kill Rodney disappeared when Clyde came and did more damage. And the cyborg really despises Clyde because he is an ordinary human who can corner him. The human's childish mind, coupled with the immense power he had suddenly received through the operation, twisted the cyborg's brain in such a way that it made him extremely impulsive. Clyde defended well against the cyborg's weapons attacks. Then, from behind him, from a place he wasn't paying attention to, the other players launched attacks simultaneously. The cyborg swung the two swords in its hand and then also swung the axe with one of its metal limbs. The three weapons hit the elder glass sword that Clyde used to protect himself. Clyde gritted his teeth from the pressure he felt. Clyde also saw the cyborg's expression, which looked strange. His eyes were bloodshot red as if they might explode at any moment. Those eyes contained the grudge buried deep within the cyborg's human heart. "I kill you." The cyborg let out a broken sound as he was also doing that while grinding his teeth. Clyde snorted. "You can't. You will die soon." Several slashes came from behind. The cyborg's weapons fell because the metal limbs had been cut by the players who attacked simultaneously. Then, once they were done cutting the metal limbs, they all lunged and plunged their swords into the cyborg's back. Croquet! 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 Their swords sank into the cyborg's body. This time, the metal layer that previously protected his body became much thinner as it had turned into the metal limbs. The cyborg looked too shocked to scream as all of the swords stabbed into his body from multiple directions simultaneously. It was as if all his air had been pulled out from within him. The regressors then drew their swords simultaneously. There was a bit of blood that was drawn out when they drew the sword. Then they jumped to get away. It was then that Clyde kicked the cyborg from the front with great force. Doug! The cyborg was thrown backward. He rolled a few times before finally coming to a stop when he hit the wall. At that time all the users rushed towards him and thrust their swords together. Croquet! 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 The elder glass sword stuck in his neck after Clyde threw it. Meanwhile, the four regressors approached the cyborg to thrust their swords at close range. In its eyes, the cyborg saw faces of people thrusting their swords at it. The anger inside him had subsided. Now all that was left was fear because he knew death was so close. Tears flowed from the cyborg's eyes. His mouth opened as if to say how scared he was and ask for mercy. However, to the regressors and Clyde, he is nothing more than a boss that they must kill. And now they know they are very close to that goal. The cyborg's vision was already getting dark. The computer system inside his head said that they had a malfunction. The cyborg said his last order in hope. It's the only thing he can do. Start the process of self-destruction. The computer system inside his head complied. Then, the cyborg's vision blackened and disappeared completely. "Let's get out of here. Quick!" Rodney said. "Why?" Reed asked. "He will destroy himself now." Hearing that, the regressors immediately drew their swords and left. Clyde also heard about it, and he immediately activated skill, Pure Lightning, to take the elder glass sword. As he drew his sword, Clyde heard an accelerating ticking sound. It was a sign that the cyborg's time to self-detonate was getting closer. Clyde immediately dashed with a body covered in lightning to get away from him. A few seconds later, the ticking sound stopped. The cyborg's body turned red like metal being heated from the inside. And then, an explosion was created in the middle of the city. The explosion was so big that it created flames that soared to the sky. The shockwave from the explosion knocked down buildings and sent countless pieces of debris flying in all directions. By the time that happened, the remaining players had already left the scene. Chapter 112, New Place to Sleep. They were all still running to get as far away as possible from the explosion. Even though they were far enough, they could still feel the heat and shockwave from the explosion. Even after a few seconds, the heat and wind waves continued to spread around. None of the buildings, houses, and plants around the blast zone survived. Everything was devoured by the heat. What is happening right now is so similar to the explosion of a nuclear bomb dropped in the middle of a city. Even though the actual effect wasn't that bad, anyone who saw it would definitely think that the explosion was not much different from a nuclear explosion. They finally stopped after about a minute of running at full speed dodging the blast. They turned towards the blast. The hot wind was still blowing on their faces. Make them squint their eyes because of it. Not long after, a notification saying that this chapter was finished appeared. This means, the boss had indeed died due to self-detonation. Congratulations to player Clyde Cross, Sonia Reed, ASQA Star, Eric Hansen, Mona COXX, Reed Rivera, and Rodney String for defeating the boss Cyborg Mark I. Rewards for defeating the boss sent to inventory. Rewards, 30,000 coins, Grade A weapons. The third chapter, Time of the Machine, has been completed. After the notification appeared, they could only heave a sigh of relief. Sonia, Reed, and Mona even immediately threw their ass on the ground with a sigh. Another day has passed, said Sonia. The light from the explosion would undoubtedly still illuminate the night sky for a few more moments. The fire that it causes will still burn even tomorrow. This previously quiet city has become a little more lively. Even if it's not for something good. Will our motel endure? Asksa asked while looking sadly at the part of the city that was destroyed by the explosion. The motel has indeed located some distance from where they fought. However, given the size of the explosion, the chances were pretty slim that the motel was still intact. The motel is probably still standing. But the damage it had suffered must have been great enough that it could no longer be a comfortable place for them to sleep in. They all understand that. We have to find a new place to sleep tonight, Mona said. Yeah, there's no way the motel will be safe after an explosion of that size, Sonia added. After agreeing, they immediately looked for a place to spend the night. Even though they knew that they had just obtained grade A weapons, they were more interested in finding a bed first. Soon they found a house that seemed to be owned by a rich family before this apocalypse happened. There is a white iron gate fence that stands in front of the house. Clyde kicked the fence to pieces as if it was nothing, then walked inside. The house consists of 3 stories and is painted with the predominant white color. There were traces of blood and dismembered bodies in the stone driveway that led them to the door of the house. The door of the house itself is a carved double door. And that door is now wide open. When they went inside, the house was pitch black. Are there still monsters here? Asksa asked with a worried tone. I don't think so, replied Rodney. Once we finish this chapter there won't be any monsters or robots left. Hearing that, the rest of the group felt relieved. They looked for the light switch and found it shortly after. As soon as the light came on, it turned out that the condition of this house was a mess. The limbs and blood were strewn in every corner and gave off a sickening rancid smell. Erg. I hope the rooms in this house are in a better condition than here, Sonia said with disgust. They began to go upstairs and look for the remaining rooms. The rooms in this house were not touched at all. Whatever incident of a massacre occurred seemed to occur after all of the occupants had exited. That is great news for them. The arrangement of the rooms is not much different than before. The regressors were in a room that somehow had 2 king-sized beds. Asksa and Sonia are in one room. And Clyde still prefers to have his room. Sonia took off all the futuristic weapons that were in her body, put all the weapons on the table, and then threw herself on the bed. Ah! Sonia took a deep breath. A smile also appeared on her face. This bed is really comfortable. It's the first time I've ever felt sleeping on a mattress this soft. Asksa is somewhat different from her. She kept her composure and sat by the bed. Yeah, I guess it's not bad, Asksa said. Sonia glanced at Asksa after hearing her words. I guess the mattress you used to sleep on was like this one. Asksa turned to her, then smiled. From her smile, Sonia could tell that her guess was right. Ah, you are so lucky. Sonia had started to close her eyes when she said that. Asksa was silent after hearing that. The look in her eyes seemed to say that she was thinking about what had happened to her until now. Then, Asksa said in a low voice. I guess you're right. I'm just lucky. But Sonia didn't hear what she said. Sonia was already letting out a soft snore with slightly parted lips. She didn't even bother cleaning herself or taking off her clothes so she could sleep more comfortably. Sonia just closed her eyes, then fell into a comfortable sleep. Asksa could only smile a little. She stood up and went to the bathroom. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face no longer looked like the face Asksa recognized. The color of her face seemed duller than she remembered. There are dark circles in her eyes which indicate fatigue. Then, looking at those eyes, Asksa saw the look in the eyes of a stranger in the mirror. Her eyes, which she remembered were light brown and had been brilliant, had now lost their shine, leaving a brown color that looks dimmer but sharper. I've seen a lot of things. PA with grave DA with acute, new iota. Asksa muttered to herself. She has changed now. She wasn't sure whether she had become a better person or not. But in this ruined world, Asksa knows that changing her is the best thing for her and everyone in the group. Asksa sits on the toilet. Her eyes stared ahead without actually seeing anything. Are we really friends, though? The question started to arise when Asksa saw everything from a distance. She was the only person who could observe everything from a broad perspective. Because the others are busy facing the enemy with attention directly focused on that enemy. Asksa sees something going on between them. There was a kind of invisible dividing wall, so even though they all seemed to work well together, they weren't really doing it because they wanted to help each other. Earlier, Asksa saw clearly that Rodney threw the black sword slash without hesitation even though he saw that Clyde was still there. There was still a possibility that Rodney did that because of the chaotic battle situation. However, her gut feeling told her that Rodney had done that on purpose. Asksa sighed. If bad turned to worst, what should she do? Then, the image of Clyde saving her first appeared in Asksa's memory. If she had not met Clyde, she would certainly have died with body parts scattered on the streets by now. Instead, she still lasted until the fourth day. And developed into a figure that is braver, and stronger. Asksa nodded because she already knew what she was going to do. So, she got up and washed her face. Asksa came out of the bathroom with a new resolve. She lay down beside Sonia and closed her eyes. Clyde opened his inventory and took the nightmare orb he got from the main control tower. He studied the grey orb with a frown. Name, Nightmare Orb, Replica. A replica, hey. Clyde still thinks none of this is real. It made him quite uneasy. What if he had to let all this go on the last day? His negative side conveys the idea. However, he had seen for himself that there were world masters and celestials who wanted to make a deal with him. So, there must be another purpose behind this selection stage, even though none of this is real. Clyde put the nightmare orb back into his inventory and then lay down on the bed. He fell asleep not long after. The next day begins with something different. No notification sounds to wake them up. No monsters suddenly came and attacked them. Yet they know that a new chapter has started. Chapter 113 Black Mist. Clyde opened his eyes. He blinked a few times and paid as much attention as he could to catch the sounds around him. Where's the notification? Clyde sat up on the bed for a few minutes. However, nothing could be heard around him. This morning, it was suddenly so quiet. The yellow light that was supposed to be sunlight was sneaking in from the window next to him. The light penetrates the thick expensive curtains in this room. Nothing. This is weird. Clyde got up from the bed and put on a black coat and the elder glass sword. Even though no notifications sounded, and no monsters or robots came in and attacked him, Clyde knew that something was approaching. This isn't over yet. So, this silence and serenity can only mean one thing. This was all just the calm before the storm they had been expecting to come. He came out of his room. As soon as he came out, it turned out that the sunlight looked a little different than before. The light looks warm and bright. But as soon as Clyde stepped into the light, he felt a chill. Not only that, but his body also felt odd. There was a sensation as if his energy was slowly being pulled out. Even though Clyde didn't feel pain, the feeling was unnatural. He stepped to the front door and opened it. What he saw made his forehead furrow deeply. What the hell? Outside, the sky was filled with black mist that looked like thick overcast clouds. However, there was lightning that glowed yellowish like sunlight that kept striking non-stop in between the black mist. The yellowish lightning made the atmosphere bright. But also cold at the same time. The light he saw earlier before wasn't light from the sun. But from those yellow lightning. Clyde had never felt the cold feeling from lightning before. Moreover, the lightning continued to strike without a sound, making its existence even more mysterious in Clyde's eyes. So it's begun. Rodney's voice came from behind him. Clyde looked up reflexively. Rodney walked over with a tense look on his face. Clyde could see that his jaw was clenched tightly. Rodney didn't look at Clyde as he walked over to him. Instead, he stared outside. To the lightning that continues to strike intensely. Now, the lightning was striking faster and faster, though still silent without any noises. The reflection of dancing yellow light was reflected on Rodney's face. Clyde looked outside again. What happened? The outer god is preparing to appear, said Rodney. Why are no notifications showing up? Clyde asked. No notifications. Rodney shook his head slowly. This is the time when we all should perish. So, there's no point in giving any notification. So they don't expect anyone to survive after this, Clyde said. Yes, Rodney said. Unless, not until recently. From behind, the sound of footsteps could be heard. The rest of the group came together to approach them. Asksa let out a gasp as she stared outside. Her eyes widened in terror. What happened? Asked Asksa. No one answered Asksa's question because they were all drowned in the same terror. Especially the regressors, who seemed to be frozen with immeasurable fear of having to face the thing that killed them again. Unlike the obstacles in the previous chapters where they can still be more calm and courageous because they have reached a high level. The threat they were about to face right now was something on a different level from anything they had faced. This is the last boss, which is arguably an impossible obstacle. After all, what would appear from behind the black mist and yellowish lightning was an outer god. An entity whose power could not be measured. Among all of them, only Clyde knew that there was a possibility that the outer god that would appear was just an imitation. Although it is clear that the outer god will have extraordinary strength, it does not mean that it is invincible. After all, Clyde had something that could guarantee that he would be able to injure that outer god. When did it appear? Clyde asked in a calm tone. His attitude made them all look at him with shocked faces. I know you are strong, but what we are going to face is different from what we faced before. Reed said to Clyde in disbelief. He was sure that Clyde felt confident because he felt strong enough. But then again, the outer god's power was on a different level. So, what do you want to do? Clyde asked Reed back. Reed, of course, didn't know how to answer that question. He was so scared, yet he knew that there was no other choice for him but to fight. Rodney said. It won't be long now. Rodney pointed outside. They all followed his directions. There is a terrible change taking place out there. Along the horizon, something like threads of various colors was rising up from the earth into the black mist. What is that? She asked. The outer god is absorbing energy from the earth, Rodney replied. Shit. Sonia gulped. What happens if he absorbs all the energy from the earth? I'm sure you've guessed it. Basically, the earth we're standing on will slowly crumble, Rodney replied. Can we prevent it if we kill that outer god? Clyde asked while looking at Rodney. Rodney and the regressors wanted to make a remark about Clyde seeming to have underestimated the outer god. But as soon as they saw the look on Clyde's face and eyes that were full of seriousness, they cancelled their intention. It was as if Clyde really believed that he could kill that outer god when it appeared. The regressors had already seen the outer god's inexplicable power, yet somehow they felt certain that Clyde had a chance against it. Seeing that, Rodney couldn't help but think, does he have something to be that confident? The regressors turned towards Rodney. Then, Rodney said. I'm not sure. It never happened before. After hearing that answer, Clyde looked ahead and walked out of the house. He looked up, then spread his gaze, trying to find something that looks like the body of the outer god. But he found nothing but a collection of black mist and yellow lightning that seemed to rule the sky. Seeing no choice, the rest of the group left after Clyde. You guys really have nothing to say about that monster? Clyde asked one more time to make sure. The regressors knew that the question was directed at them. Yet, what they could say to Clyde was not far from a no answer. Although pronounced differently. Clyde looked at them. All right, then. If you want to survive, you'd better also fight as hard as you can. That way we can see what happens after this monster. Rodney is increasingly convinced that Clyde has something up his sleeve. He always acted mysterious yesterday and entered the main control tower alone. So he definitely got something there. They waited for a while in thumping hearts. Including Clyde, who, despite putting on a calm and straight face, also felt a nervousness in his heart. In that white room, Agatha and Lucho stared at the monitor screen that showed the whereabouts of the remaining 7 players. There was a faint smile on Lucho's face that gave off a sly look. Realizing that, Agatha asked. Don't you want to go up to him again and offer a contract, senior? Yet. But the time hasn't come yet, said Lucho. What time do you mean? I'll wait until he feels despair. Until he realizes that he can't do anything despite having a high level and strong skills. Agatha knew that the outer god present here was not a real thing. However, the monster called outer god in this chapter was indeed something that was impossible to defeat even for max level players. Because all of their stats were capped at level 10. If they could use all of their stat points, then the outer god wouldn't be a problem. It was intentional for the players to feel immeasurable despair. Some of them even died less than a minute after the outer god appeared and was immediately declared a failure. CO. However, there are some who manage to survive longer than others. The player who survives the longest will graduate with grade A. It was a simple selection system but also quite cruel. All their efforts up to this point would only be determined by how long they lasted. Because they couldn't possibly get away with killing the outer god. But I'm sure that this time will be different. Agatha tried to keep her smile from appearing and making Lucho suspicious. She saw that Clyde looked the calmest of them all. Clyde has the nightmare orb. No player has obtaining that item before because its location is hidden and hard to reach. I'm so looking forward to what he's going to do, thought Agatha. Chapter 114 Descending. The strands of energy absorbed from the earth by the black mist grew more intense. Where they were standing right now as well, they could see how the energy was being absorbed upwards from their feet. All of that creates a very horrific scene. They saw, slowly, a certain doom before their eyes. The scope of the black mist seemed limitless and filled the horizon. They could no longer see the sky that was usually above them. There was only an existence that was devouring everything they saw. Suddenly, Clyde jumps on the roof. His sudden action took the others by surprise after being frozen in terror for too long. "What's wrong, Clyde?" Asksa asked in a loud voice full of anxiety. Clyde landed on the roof. He looked up at a point that seemed no different from the black mist around him. However, Clyde realized something. "The monster appeared," said Clyde. They all heard Clyde's answer. They jumped onto the roof of the house and stared where Clyde was staring. "I saw nothing but black mist," Mona said. "No," Rodney said. "Look closely." So they all focused their eyes better in that direction. Soon, they could see that there were wisps of tendrils moving behind the black mist. "Oh shit," Reed muttered in a trembling voice. What they were waiting for finally came out. It was obvious that the form behind the black mist was a collection of tentacles. "How big is that monster actually?" Clyde asked without taking his eyes off what he saw up there. "Too big for us to handle. We didn't even get to see its entire form before we died," Rodney replied. "It's even possible that the monsters haven't finished descending when we die," Mona added. Clyde drew his elder glass sword. His movements still looked confident as if he didn't feel any fear. The others looked at him with increasingly confused looks. Not long after, the black tentacles got bigger because they got closer to the Earth's surface. Its form is almost similar to the Devourer's tentacles. However, there are colorful strands along the tentacles that come from the energy in the Earth that it absorbs. Immense pressure was coming to the players as the tentacles drew closer. The pressure made them groan and had difficulty breathing. "Get ready," Clyde said. "You're really going to attack it?" Sonia asked in disbelief. "What else can we do?" Clyde said rhetorically. Then he took the nightmare orb from his inventory. The rest of his group stared at the palm-sized orb that had suddenly appeared in his hand. "What's that?" Sonia asked. "Something that can hurt the monster," answered Clyde. Clyde then crumpled up the nightmare orb. A moment later the orb shattered and a grey mist shot out. The grey mist swirled around for a few moments before finally sinking into the bodies of the 7 of them. The 7 players felt an unfamiliar and strange power enter their bodies. The foreign power flowed and made their bodies feel heavier. But the new load is not a problem for those who already have stats maxed out. Clyde also felt his body suddenly become a little heavier. But, he was sure it would not be a big problem. Grrrrhhhh. Rumbling sounds that seemed to occur from all directions were heard. They all looked up and saw that the mass of tentacles was descending faster than before. What did you just give us?" Reed asked, dumbfounded. "I told you, it's something that can make us hurt the monster," said Clyde. "Watch out." Suddenly, a tentacle shot down towards them. The tentacles the size of a train fell at an incredible speed. Luckily Clyde warned them in time or their bodies would have been crushed under the tentacles. They scatter in time in different directions. Clyde didn't waste much time and immediately shot back toward the tentacle after successfully dodging it. "For this time, I don't need to hold back. Pure Lightning, LV10, is activated. *JZZZZRRRTTT. *. Bluish-white lightning enveloped Clyde's entire body. In the blink of an eye, he was next to the tentacle, within striking distance of his sword. Clyde channeled magic power into the elder glass sword and swung it with all his might. The blade slashed through the tentacle that was the size of a train and pierced through it. Clyde put more power into his swing. The bluish blades of the elder glass sword that were electrified by the lightning went deeper and deeper into the tentacles. Clyde's lightning also spread further and further into the tentacle to erode it from the inside. Then, something surprising happened. Crot. The giant tentacles were cut by Clyde's slash. The tip of the tentacle falls down while the base rises again. Grrrrhhh. The strangely loud growl sounded again. Clyde landed back on the ground after successfully cutting the tentacles and looked up. And Clyde saw it. A pair of eyes that came from far away and looked so ancient were staring at him from behind the black mist. On the other hand, the regressors were staring with shock very clearly on their faces. How? Reed was speechless. His ability to speak suddenly disappeared when he saw what Clyde had just done. His regressors' friends felt the same way. They were astonished, and couldn't believe what they were seeing. The figure they were so afraid of seemed impossible for them to touch. Clyde had just cut it with his own strength. Rodney gritted his teeth. He didn't know if Clyde could do that because he was so strong, or because of the power of the orb he had just broken. If indeed he could cut the tentacles due to the power of the orb, then they could too. However, there is still a possibility that Clyde can cut it because his strength is so powerful. Clyde only said that with the orb they could hurt the outer god. Not directly able to kill it. Then how much damage they could deal to the outer god was probably still based on their strength. I still have to be careful of him, thought Rodney. Then Rodney drew his sword as well. You've seen for yourself that we can injure it now. Then there's no point in being scared anymore. Reed, Mona, and Eric swallowed their saliva. What Rodney said was indeed true. Now, they had hope of defeating the monster that had become their scourge. So, this is the time to fight. And get revenge for the suffering that outer god caused them. Eric, Mona, and Reed charged to follow Rodney, who had run first, leaving Sonia and Isksa behind them. Sonia and Isksa looked at each other. We just have to do what we usually do, right? Sonia said while raising her rifle. Isksa took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. After all, we've been at it for 4 days. Sonia started aiming. She also felt a new power gathering within her body. She drew that new power to become one with the rifle she was holding. Surprisingly, the rifle that comes from future technology absorbs her power well. Isksa looked at the situation while trying to think when was the right moment to enter into the fight. Meanwhile, the outer god began to lower those giant tentacles again. This time it deployed 3 tentacles at once. What is happening? Lucho jumped off his couch while staring at the monitor screen with a frown. His eyes gave off a cold green light. Agatha, who was next to him, also felt her chest beating fast. She had expected that Lucho's reaction would be like that. Lucho turned to Agatha with those green eyes. Agatha swallowed hard and winced. Did you do something while I was away? Lucho asked in a sharp, threatening tone. I didn't do anything, Senior, Agatha replied in a tone and expression that she made as calm as possible. And she managed to act well. Lucho stared at her for a few moments, trying to find any traces of deceit on her face. However, he did not find it. Then how can you explain what's happening now? Lucho pointed at the screen showing the players fighting the outer god's tentacles. Perhaps, one of the Celestials met him in secret while you were away, Senior. Then whoever that Celestial was, they gave Clyde clues about the whereabouts of the Nightmare Orb, Agatha answered. To be honest, Agatha was a bit surprised too. She wasn't completely lying when she said that Clyde knew about the Nightmare Orb item from the Celestials. Clyde just asked her about the treasure box, so she said it. But before that, Clyde already knew that in the treasure box, there was an item that could turn their situation around in an instant. That is the Nightmare Orb. Damn Celestials! They messed up my plans again. Lucho shouted full of frustration. He even pulled his own hair. The sight was something that greatly comforted Agatha. Especially because she was one of the people who had caused that frustration. Chapter 115 Helping Hand. Lucho was still staring at the screen with cold green fire in his eyes. The longer he looked, it was as if the greenish light that looked like a fire burning inside his eyeballs getting brighter. It was a sign that Lucho's fury is also getting bigger. Whoever meets him, must have done it before the Guardians came. In that case, it will be very difficult to find out who the culprit is. Lucho's fists were tightly clenched at his sides. Even now, a dark green aura also appeared surrounding Lucho's body. Even though the aura was thin, but Agatha could feel that the pressure in this room was getting heavier. She remembered how Lucho made her go through very torturous days by tying her to the wall with his chains that tore into her flesh at that time. Subconsciously, Agatha swallowed her saliva. What if Lucho decided to take out his anger on her now? Too scared and nervous, Agatha's mind proposed the idea to her. In fact, Lucho wasn't someone who would commit violence if it wasn't necessary. About that time when Agatha decided to swing her weapon at him, Lucho punished her because he assumed it was the absolutely necessary thing to do. Lucho's mind was now occupied with nothing but thought about how to renew his plan. He sat back on the couch and massaged his forehead. At this rate, I might not get another chance to make a contract with him, said Lucho. The selection stage isn't over yet, senior. It's possible that later an opportunity will arise, Agatha said. Trying to be someone who consoled him. Lucho turned to Agatha. She could still see the green flame in Lucho's eyes, who was now staring at her. You're right, Lucho said. It's possible that opportunity will come. Even if it's not at this selection stage. Agatha's brow furrowed upon hearing his words. Did he intend to continue visiting Clyde even after he passed this selection stage? If that were true, then the obstacles Lucho would face would be even more difficult. In Agatha's mind, Clyde would definitely qualify for grade A. And that way he would become the target of many Celestials. It meant that Lucho would be facing the Celestials who wanted to recruit Clyde when he wanted to meet him. But it's different with Agatha. Clyde has completed the personal request that she gave. It gave her a special kind of bond with Clyde. Once again, Agatha grinned inwardly. Now it was clear that she had more advantages than Lucho. Agatha glanced at Lucho with a corner of her eyes. Lucho was looking at the screen very seriously. Probably he is thinking about his next plan while keeping his eyes on the course of the battle. Agatha sighed while feeling how nice it was to have an upper hand. She now just had to enjoy the battle as an audience. Back to the fight. The outer god began to increase the variety of its attacks. It was no longer just throwing endless tentacles. It also started throwing various troublesome fire elemental attacks. From the tentacles, fireballs flew out and shot toward the players. They tried to dodge by scattering in all directions. However, the tentacles were too many and they kept throwing fireballs. So, no matter how agile they are, those fireballs are still hard to dodge. Unable to continue dodging, they started parrying and taking the fireballs in the face. Luckily the fireballs' attack didn't cause too much damage. It was because their stats had been maxed out, and because of the influence of the Nightmare Orb's power. That orb is incredible. Clyde thought as he continued to jump and dodge every tentacle and fireball. He had deactivated all of his skills because he wanted to conserve magic power for the attacks he would unleash on the outer god's true body. But Clyde could only stare up with an annoyed expression. He gritted his teeth because the outer god had not fully descended yet. It just lingers behind this black mist with a pair of eyes looking down watching them. Clyde wasn't sure if he could break through that layer of black mist. The yellowish lightning was still flashing, indicating that the black mist contained a great concentration of magic power. Penetrating it definitely won't be easy. Clyde thought that he would most likely be able to break through the black mist if he exerted a lot of magic power. But he would waste a lot of magic power that he could have used to attack the outer god's true body. So Clyde can only wait for now. He looked at the rest of his group. They are also struggling to avoid every incoming attack. Be it from tentacles or fireballs. Clyde knew that the max level of their stats wasn't like his reaching level 10. Therefore, no matter how hard they tried, they were still slower than him. Suddenly, Asksa was hit by a strike from the tentacles. Her body flew into the air due to the great force. It didn't end there, the other tentacle came to swing from above her. Clyde rushed to Asksa. Knowing that he wouldn't make it in time, Clyde activated skill, Pure Lightning, and took off at a tremendously surging speed. In the blink of an eye, Clyde was already in front of Asksa and immediately swung the Elder Glass Sword in front of his body. The tentacles moved swiftly towards him, then met the Elder Glass Sword that was enveloped in lightning. Because the size of the tentacle was much smaller than the one Clyde cut at the beginning of the fight, now Clyde could cut it with less force. Crot. The tentacle was cut in two. The other parts were thrown randomly while the other parts were retracted back to the outer god's original body. Asksa landed hard on the ground. Clyde landed a moment later after her. You all right? Clyde asked. Yeah, I'm fine, Asksa answered while trying to get up. She can get up easily, indicating that she is indeed just fine. Don't you have a plan? Asksa then asked Clyde. And then, Clyde got an idea when he was seeing Asksa. Asksa has the skill to increase attack power, and Clyde will definitely need that skill when he sees an opportunity to attack. I got one, said Clyde. Asksa widened her eyes, looking excited. What's that? I'll explain later. Now you have to stay close to me. Asksa immediately nodded when he heard that answer. The other tentacles came toward them as if they didn't want to give them a chance to take a break. Moreover, the tentacles also fired fireballs at the two of them. Clyde held Asksa's hand so they wouldn't be too far apart. because he needs her to always be near him. Isksa, who realized Clyde's tight grip, reflexively looked at her wrist. There, Clyde's wide arms gripped her small arm tightly. But Isksa knew that the gesture was nothing more than an effort so that Clyde could get her help right away when he needed it. So she won't think too much. Boom! 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 Explosions were created behind them non-stop. Debris flew from the building being hit by the fireballs and tentacles. But Clyde and Isksa can avoid it all. What happened now was almost the same as when they fought the Devourer. The tentacles that kept coming without stopping were aiming at them as if they had their own consciousness. But now something was different. Now there are additional fireballs that come with the tentacles. And those tentacles are much stronger than those from the Devourer. Showing that the monsters they were fighting right now were different. Blabber! 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 The lightning above them flashed with a loud boom after moving silently before. That must be a sign that something is going to happen, Clyde muttered as he kept his eyes up. Isksa, who was next to him, was silent. Her heart pounding with fear and anxiety grew louder, because she knew that Clyde's words were true. The air around them also grew heavier as the yellow lightning flashed loudly. They are supposed to be paralyzed by now. However, due to the influence of the nightmare orb, they were still able to endure quite well. After several minutes of only focusing on dodging, Clyde finally saw what he was waiting for. The black mist and yellow lightning above them split apart as if pushed by a tremendous force. Then finally, the shape of the outer god's true body started to become more obvious. That's it, Clyde said. He then pulled Isksa closer to it. Isksa, on the other hand, could only grit her teeth as fear gripped her. The sight of the outer god's figure getting clearer made her blood freeze. Yet, Clyde didn't seem to realize that and continued advancing while pulling her hand. Isksa swallowed her fear deep into her gut because she didn't want to become a burden to Clyde's plans. Chapter 116 Change of Plan. They continued to move between all the tentacles and fireballs. Clyde's grip on Isksa's wrist tightened and made the girl feel more pain. However, Isksa didn't want to say what she felt because she knew that it would distract Clyde. Isksa bit her lip so she could keep her voice out. Clyde now no longer activates skill, pure lightning, because he doesn't know if he can use it while carrying Isksa. Clyde didn't want his skill to suddenly strike Isksa and electrocute the girl. So Clyde only relies on his stats speed. Even then, he had to hold back because Isksa's speed was incomparable to his. Clyde slashed the Elder Glass sword relentlessly to repel every tentacle and fireball coming at them from all sides. He turned while keeping Isksa behind him. With Isksa's presence, Clyde felt a burden that he had not expected before. Usually, when he only moves alone, Clyde can move more freely. But Clyde wouldn't blame Isksa. She wasn't naturally someone fit for fighting. From her stat to her private attribute that she has, Clyde already knows that he has to go the extra mile to protect Isksa. So Clyde did it with all his might. He spun around to block the attacks coming from all directions. He even sacrificed his own body to protect her. All that so Clyde can keep Isksa's body in the best condition possible. Because when the time comes, he will need Isksa at her best. We're getting closer, Clyde said. Ash did not answer. More precisely, she can't, because she is busy enduring the pain in her wrist and the fatigue of having to keep up with Clyde's speed. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk. Boom. 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 Tentacles, fireballs, and now the yellow lightning was crashing continuously at them. The outer god's variety of attacks continued to increase, making it more difficult to get close to the real body. Now Clyde could see the shape of the outer god's legs. The leg looks like a human leg, grey as ash. The size of the foot is so big. The distance from the ankle to the knee alone reaches 10 meters. Even with just that part showing, Clyde and Isksa could already feel the pressure around them increase by several times. Looks like the more body parts that drop, the stronger the pressure in this place will be. This is bad. Clyde turned to Isksa. He widened his eyes when he realized that Isksa's face looked painful. He wanted to land somewhere so Isksa could rest for a while. But the outer god will not give them that luxury. Instead, it deployed more fireballs and yellow lightning strikes toward them. Are you hurt? Clyde asked Isksa in the midst of his difficulty dodging the attacks. And no. I'm fine, Isksa replied. She tried to pull out a smile. But what came out was just a grimace that increasingly described her pain. Clyde could see that Isksa wasn't fine at all. He immediately spread his sights past the tentacles and all sorts of destruction to find the rest of the group. He couldn't do it alone if he had to bring Isksa along. So, in the end, Clyde had to go to the others to ask for their help. Originally Clyde wanted to attack the outer god himself. The other group members weren't as strong and fast as him, so Clyde thought not to involve them because what he was doing was something very dangerous. Even though he found it difficult, that means the other members of the group found it even more difficult than him. However, Clyde felt that he should revise the plan. At least he could ask the other group members to watch over Isksa and remove obstacles so he could get closer to the outer god's body. Clyde, reluctantly, changed course. He, who had brought Isksa closer to the outer god, now turned and brought Isksa towards Sonia, who was closest to them than the others. Sonia is also dodging the tentacles that attack her. But she didn't fire her rifle to save her magic power. Suddenly she saw Clyde and Isksa approaching from a distance. Sonia immediately approached them and started firing rifles to ease their rendezvous process. After several minutes of fighting their way to get closer to each other, they finally got come together. "What are you planning now?" Sonia asked with great urgency in her voice. Clyde immediately told her about her plan to attack the outer god's true body with the help of Isksa's powers. Sonia glanced at him in disbelief. "Are you sure you can do that? Don't you see how just those legs the outer god is already giving us this much pressure?" "It's the only way," Clyde answered her in a calm tone. "We have to kill that outer god to be able to finish today, right?" Sonia, who knew that was true, knew that she could only agree with Clyde's proposal. "Then we should attack it together," Sonia said. "I don't know if that's possible. I can see you guys are having a hard time just dodging all those tentacles and fireballs. I'll attack it myself and you guys will reduce the obstacle for me so I can get closer." Sonia thought for a moment as she looked at Clyde's face. The man had a stiff face and his eyes showed confidence that he would indeed be able to injure the outer god. Maybe even Clyde could kill it. Sonia knew that Clyde was indeed the strongest of them all. They were able to survive until now, and were able to reach such a high level because of Clyde. So, why should she doubt him now? "All right," said Sonia. "We have to rendezvous with the others first." After meeting the agreement, they immediately went to meet the other group members. That proved to be quite a difficult task as they all scattered quite a distance. In a siege of tentacles and all of these attacks, it is almost impossible to get close to one another. Even standing in the same place for a long time was extremely hard. So it took Clyde, Isksa, and Sonia a little longer to reach them. Clyde felt this was a bit of a waste of time. If only he could attack the outer god himself, everything would be so much faster. But he needs Isksa's power. And Isksa needs others to protect her. Then, Clyde can also use them to pave the way for him. Even though he was strong, it turned out that the outer god gave him extremely high hardships. Clyde suspected that they really shouldn't be able to defeat the outer god. The growling sound that was heard from all directions was initiated again. Suddenly, from the outer god's body appeared dozens of tiny human-sized creatures. However, their form is so strange and only a few resemble human beings. They have a pair of wings that look like crow's wings with grey feathers. Their hands are in the form of bird feet and have crow's claws. And their legs are shaped like grey human legs. Their heads are just shaped like a collection of black mist that clumps above their bodies, complementing their seemingly odd appearance. Those players could see the strange creatures coming out of the outer god's feet. They came out tearing the skin off the grey feet with the claws of their hands. Then flew after flapping the grey crow's wings. "What the fuck is that?" Sonia shouted while looking at the mass of creatures that started to descend to fly toward them. Isksa didn't answer because she was also in shock. While Clyde didn't answer because he didn't see any point in answering that question. There were 5 strange grey flying creatures approaching them. "I have to let you go first," Clyde said to Isksa. Clyde feels it's okay to let her go now with Sonia around so he can fight the flying creatures better. Aska only answered with a nod. But she also felt relief in her heart as soon as Clyde's strong grip left her wrist. Clyde looked at Sonia, who seemed to be preparing her rifle anxiously. "Protect Isksa and keep moving. I will open a path for us," Clyde said to Sonia. Sonia saw no reason to argue with him. So he immediately pulled Isksa to get closer to her. In the middle of that situation, Sonia notices Isksa's wrist turning red. But she didn't say anything about it. And just focus her attention on being able to move and dodge properly. Meanwhile, Clyde shot toward the 5 strange flying creatures. He swung the Elder Glass sword towards the closest one. However, the creature was able to block the sword with the crow's claws. Meanwhile, another flying creature approached from the left while swinging its claw. Clyde immediately kicked the creature coming from the left. Turns out, they weren't as strong as he thought. With one kick, Clyde manages to send the creature flying backward several meters. Chapter 117 More Destruction. Clyde managed to send the flying creature backward with just one kick. That proves that they are not too big of a threat. It created relief in Clyde's heart. Sonia and Isksa, who saw this, also felt relieved. Let's keep moving. Clyde continued his steps to open the way. Behind, Isksa and Sonia followed at a pace they were trying to match with Clyde. But in the end, even though they were trying their best to keep up, Clyde continued to lengthen the distance between them. Clyde soon realized that they were both left behind. He looked back and saw two of the odd flying creatures flying up from behind them. Clyde reactivated skill, Pure Lightning, and lunged back at them. Isksa and Sonia only saw a bluish-white flash of lightning in front of them that moved so fast. Clyde immediately slashed the Elder Glass sword at the two flying creatures. His slash created an arc of lightning that hit the heads of the two creatures. The two odd flying creatures fell down like dead birds in midair. Clyde watched how they fell just in case they both flapped their wings and flew towards him again. But that didn't happen. The two creatures fell to the ground and lay there. The absence of any movement from them indicated that they were already dead. Clyde returns to Isksa and Sonia and deactivates his skill, Pure Lightning. I'm going to move slower now, Clyde said, looking at the two girls. Thanks for understanding, Sonia replied with a sigh of relief. They proceeded to split the chaos in front of them. Clyde acts as a pathfinder and protector who protects them from all directions if Sonia feels unable to move fast enough. They saw Rodney in front of them. He is also in the same predicament. There are three odd flying creatures that jump at Rodney from three different directions. Clyde could see that Rodney could defend well. Even though he couldn't beat those three creatures like him. Rodney glanced up when he noticed Clyde, Sonia, and Isksa approaching. Then he returned to fight the creatures. Rodney's problem is gone with Clyde's coming. A bluish-white flash passed around him. When he realized what was happening, Rodney could see that the bodies of the three flying creatures that had attacked him were already lying around. They just died when Clyde came. He didn't take long, as if he was just casually passing by and suddenly the creature was dead. Rodney is increasingly aware that Clyde's strength cannot be underestimated. Even when he had obtained such a powerful title, Rodney wasn't sure if he could beat Clyde in a head-on battle. Clyde stopped in front of her and deactivated skill, Pure Lightning. You can see where your other friends are? Clyde asked. The urgency was clear in his voice. No. We all lost each other in this mess, Rodney replied. Okay. Let's go find them. Clyde prepared to start moving again. What are you planning? Rodney asked. I will kill that outer god. Clyde looked at Rodney with eyes full of conviction. Once again, his face showed no hesitation. He said it like how he said it to Sonia earlier. But how? Rodney couldn't stop thinking. With your help, said Clyde. Now we have to rendezvous with others first. Come on. Without waiting for a reply from Rodney, Clyde already rushed to move again. Although he did not know where to start looking. Rodney gritted his teeth. In fact, he did believe that Clyde could kill the outer god. Rodney knew how strong Clyde was and he thought that his chances of killing the outer god were quite high. What Rodney was worried about was that if Clyde managed to kill the outer god he would gain new power. Either in the form of title or other rewards. If that happened, then his chances of killing him would be even more difficult. Hey! What are you thinking? Come on! Sonia's voice made Rodney flinch a little. He wasted no time and immediately followed Clyde. While thinking of a plan on what to do when what he was worried about happened. Clyde moved swiftly up front, slashing and parrying the yellow lightning and fireballs like it was all no big deal. Isksa, Sonia, and Rodney who had joined followed behind him. Rodney also knew what he had to do. Needless to say, Clyde was in charge of protecting the rear. Rodney immediately did that and immediately relieved Sonia's burden and Isksa's fear. A moment later Clyde saw where Reed and Mona were. It was such a nice coincidence that they were together. Clyde immediately informed the others. Upon hearing that, they rushed to Reed and Mona to fight their way through all obstacles. It was obvious that Reed and Mona felt relieved by their arrival. But their expressions became tense again when they heard Clyde's plan. However, they knew that there was nothing else they could do. So, they immediately joined in on Clyde's plan without thinking about it too long. The 6 of them are looking for Eric, who still hasn't been found in the midst of all this chaos. They had not found him yet, and that made them start to worry. And then, Asksa shouted while pointing down. P Alpha D Alpha, new comma, that's him. They followed the direction Asksa pointed and saw Eric lying on the ground covered in blood. The 2 crows-winged creatures surrounded him as if they wanted to immediately devour him. They were all so shocked that they couldn't think fast. Amidst all that, a bluish-white flash was created and shot toward Eric. Clyde has already made his move to save Eric. In the blink of an eye, Clyde was already below and started slashing his elder glass sword. Clyde danced with overflowing speed and power, splitting and decapitating the creatures until there was nothing left around Eric. Luckily, the others weren't stupid. They also immediately shot after Clyde after he cleared the flying creatures. Asksa as well immediately swiftly approached Eric and checked on his condition. Asksa saw that Eric had serious wounds all over his body. The wound was caused by a scratch and stab of a sharp object. Other flying creatures started arriving from above. They flew flapping their crow wings amidst the yellow lightning bolts and tentacles, creating a frightening scenery. "Cover me," Asksa said. Everyone who heard her knew immediately what they had to do. They immediately formed a protective circle while Asksa used her skill to heal Eric. More destruction began to occur around them. From a distance, they could see the ground, trees, and buildings starting to rise up and then being absorbed into the black mist. The sight conjured up an image of doomsday right in front of their eyes. They immediately knew that time was running out. They may even have less time than they think. "Hurry!" Reed turned to Asksa, who was healing Eric, and shouted in a panicked tone. "His injuries are so bad. He is dying. I will need some more time," Ashka replied. She didn't know why it took her longer to do this healing. With skill, healing already at level 10, she should be able to quickly heal Eric as she did before. Unless... Asksa saw the scratch and stab wounds. Everything was caused by that strange flying creature. Could it be that the wounds they had caused dealt more damage than normal wounds? That is a big possibility. In fact, Asksa felt that it was almost certain. She pumped up her magic power even more to heal Eric. She was also aware that around them, nature was approaching destruction very quickly. But she couldn't lose focus now. The rest of the group is also struggling with a bigger burden now. Besides, they have to dispel the tentacles, lightning, and fireballs. They also have to protect Asksa and Eric from the debris around them. "How much longer, Asksa?" Clyde asked. "A little bit more," replied Asksa. Moments later, she said. "It's done." Eric opened his eyes. The pain in his whole body was gone now. But he was immediately greeted by the horror scene of doom that was right in front of his eyes. "Get up, man!" Reed pulled Eric's arm, who was still stunned by what he saw, to stand up. Seeing that Eric had stood up, without wasting any more time, they immediately left that place. As soon as they left, the ground they stepped on was immediately absorbed upwards along with other objects around it. "Now where should we stand?" Sonia asked in a voice full of fear. Clyde didn't answer her right away because he didn't know how to answer either. There was only one thing on his mind right now. "We're running out of time. Let's start attacking the outer god directly." Clyde spoke while looking at the other group members. He could see the despair in everyone's eyes. Unfortunately, he is not someone who can give a speech that can burn their spirits. All he could do was say what he would do next. Chapter 118 Through the Destruction. The Archangel with blonde hair shifted restlessly in her seat. She stared at the monitor screen that has become a black void that didn't display anything. This has been happening since a few days ago. It frustrated her because she was no longer able to observe the man. She knows what happened. The Guardians of the World Masters were doing their job and blocking outsiders from illegally viewing the selection stage. The Archangel couldn't believe that the chief would risk attracting the Guardians to protect the selection stage. Knowing that there is a possibility of conflict in the Far East. Does that mean he has a close relationship with the World Masters in charge of the selection stage? She muttered to herself. But a moment later she shook her head lazily. It's no use thinking about it. Now there is something better for her to do. The Archangel stood up from her chair. Then opened the door of the room. When she came out, the Archangel was immediately greeted by her servant who had been waiting faithfully since earlier. "Get everything ready. I'm going to the starting zone," she said. Or rather, she ordered. "You wish to personally welcome the candidates who are coming, Your Majesty." Her servant, a tall man with long blonde hair, asked. Yes, answered the archangel. But why, your majesty? Why to bother? The servant asked. He is a player who can kill my 3 warrior candidates. He obviously did it because of an order from one of those filthy demons. I can't let him fall into their hands, the archangel replied. There was a heavy hint of hatred in her voice when she said the word demon. She seemed to say it by spitting out the word. The servant also knew about the warrior candidate who was killed by a single player. He killed the 3 candidates by himself, which was something quite remarkable. He doesn't know how that is possible. Supposedly, an ordinary human who just obtained their power couldn't be that strong. That made the decision of the archangel he served to meet him face to face very reasonable. Even though some of the other servants would make comments behind her, the blonde-haired man always supported her decision even when he didn't know the reason. They walked towards a large building where they kept most of their treasures. With those various extraordinary treasures, they intended to persuade Clyde to come over to their side. The archangel also knows that it's not gonna be just her who starts to prepare. With all the various achievements that man had accomplished, and how trashed the selection stage system was, the other Celestials must have also started preparing themselves. The selection stage this time seems to be a different spectacle than before. No one had ever generated this much hype from the selection stage. The outdated and weak selection stage system also plays an important role in this event. If the system wasn't that weak, then the Celestials wouldn't be able to notice Clyde's existence. Chaos and destruction are approaching in that world. Everyone in that world was now seeing something that came from their deepest nightmare. Everything around that world was now floating due to being pulled by the infinite force field. The buildings that originally stood firm as if they controlled the city now floated helplessly, then were absorbed into the black mist that covered the entire world. Trees, animals, and the ground were also torn from their places. Coalesce with the buildings to enter the black mist. Meanwhile, the form of a giant monstrosity was slowly descending to earth. Those grey feet alone were enough to bring about this destruction. Now, the rest of its other body came down. The outer god's stomach seemed to bulge like that of an obese man. Its skin is grey and wrinkled. Then, both of its hands were so long that they touched its calves. There are only 3 fingers on that hand and they are oddly shaped. The fingers are long and wriggling, as if have a life of their own. Grrrhhhhh. Its growling sound is hard to describe. It didn't come from its throat like a growl from other monsters usually came. Instead, the voice seemed to come from all over the place. The players felt as if the growls were coming from the air around them. As soon as they heard that growl, they immediately halted their advance and were stopped by the immense pressure. They were now standing on a building that was floating towards the black mist. Their footing is indeed very fragile, but this is all they can have. All sorts of things around them were in an even more severe state. In fact, this building can be said to be in the best condition because it wasn't smashed to pieces. I didn't know things would get this bad. This is the end of the world. This is the end of this world. Reed said in a despaired and scared tone. The fear within Reed's voice was so great that he could no longer think as reasonably as before. His eyes spread around, widened, and reflected the dread in his heart. Hey! Rodney shook his body. Get yourself together. Reed stared at Rodney with those eyes filled with terror. We won't be able to kill that outer god. We should kill ourselves now and start again. Reed's words made Eric and Mona turn towards him. For Eric and Mona, this is all too terrifying. After hearing Reed's words and seeing what was happening around them, they felt that dying now and starting all over again wouldn't be a bad idea. But Rodney is different. He had already gotten to this level of power and would not want to start over again from scratch. Stop whining and open the fucking way. Just as the attack of fear was about to overwhelm them, Clyde's screams came and seemed to wake them up. Reed, Eric, and Mona turned to Clyde. Clyde was already standing with a body covered in bluish-white lightning. His face was stern and his eyes fixed on them. His hand grip on the elder glass sword was tight. We can kill it, Clyde said. They felt that the truth in those words was almost certain. Even though from what they saw there was nothing to support Clyde's words. Eric, Mona, and Reed suddenly woke up from the terror that enveloped them. Even though their fear still hadn't disappeared, they were now able to move again. They gripped their weapons even tighter. And waiting for Clyde's signal to move on. Clyde himself did not expect that their reaction would be like that. Clyde expected that they would remain in fear and he would have to do it himself. Yet they look ready to fight. Clyde didn't know if there was something different from the way he had said something or some other factor. But now it doesn't matter. I'm going to attack that outer god. You guys cover me from surrounding danger, Clyde said, continuing his order. Let's go. Clyde jumped off the building first. Then he stepped on the rubble and all kinds of things that he could use to step on so he could get close to the outer god. Sonia and Isksa remained close together. Sonia turned to Isksa and expected the girl to cry or show something to indicate her fear. However, the girl seemed stronger than he thought. Isksa's eyes glanced at Clyde's back. Her jaw clenched and then she turned to Sonia. Isksa didn't say anything. But her gaze told something clear. They should follow Clyde now and support him. Sonia nodded. Then, together with the regressors, the two of them jumped over the rubble to catch up with Clyde. Clyde looked back. He was relieved when he saw Isksa still among them and caught up with him. Clyde could see from Isksa's face that she is fine. It made him somehow feel proud to see how the girl had progressed until now. Clyde turned back to the front. The outer god seemed to turn its body towards them, it was already aware of their presence. The outer god releases those strange flying creatures again. This time there were far more of them than before. Maybe 5 times the previous amount. The more Clyde got closer to it, his self-confidence was shrinking. He could feel the terrifying power of the outer god and it created doubts in his heart. However, just as he was starting to feel that doubt, a voice buzzed in his head. You can use the demon essence I gave you. You only need to stab your sword into that demon essence. It was Gremory's voice that surprisingly woke him up from the doubt that was starting to overwhelm him. Rho Alpha D Alpha, Nu, M, the growl came again and suddenly the outer god stretched out both arms toward them. Clyde wasted no time and immediately took the demon essence from his inventory. Then do as the Gremory says. He stabbed the bluish blade of the sword into the red orb. Chapter 119 An upgrade. Your Grace, isn't that all too much? Nimue looked at Gremory with a worried feeling. Her concern is there for a reason. Gremory was now slumped in her seat. Her face was pale and there were beads of sweat running down her pale face. Huff. Huff. Gremory was breathing heavily. Because she had just done a tough task that drained her stamina to the limit. Nimue bit her lip uneasily. She had warned her master quite persistently before she did it. P Alpha and D Alpha no, 1-0 however, Nimue knows more than enough that Gremory is almost impossible to overturn her decision. So, in the end, Nimue has to see her master exhausted like this. After doing something that besides draining a lot of magic power, is also very dangerous. It was worth it, Nimue, Gremory said. A weak smile appeared on Gremory's pale face. After looking at her even more closely, Nimue also noticed that Gremory's lips which were previously bright red now looked a bit paler. But upon seeing Gremory's smiling face, even though it was weak, Nimue felt that her worry and sadness at seeing her master like that gone away. You think so, Your Grace? Nimue smiled a weak smile too. If that's the case, then it's really worth it. Gremory just used her power to send telepathy to Clyde. What she gave was an invaluable hint that could possibly lead Clyde to achieve something extraordinary. That is killing the replica of Outer God, which is his final hurdle. So far, no one had gotten this close to killing Outer God. The previous candidates who were called the strongest on their selection stage died from the pressure when the Outer God replica's leg began to descend. However, Clyde gained a lot of things so he could survive this long. Gremory thought that Clyde would be able to kill that Outer God. Her feeling said that. So, Gremory immediately lends her help when she sensed that Clyde was in trouble. Even though it was very dangerous and tiring because of the existence of the Guardians. Even just by sending telepathy for a split second, the Gremory was already taking a great risk. Luckily, she managed to do that quickly and, hopefully, not alarm the Guardians. Or she will suffer a major loss. What are you going to do now, Your Grace? Nimue asked. What else can we do but wait? Gremory said. We don't need to be too hasty to get ready. I and that human already have a bond. So, I will be able to meet him more easily. A bond that occurs just because of a personal request is not as strong as a bond that is created because of a contract. However, that was enough for Gremory to steal the lead from the other Celestials who might also set their eyes on Clyde. So, Gremory wasn't too worried. She now just had to focus on restoring her drained strength after contacting Clyde. Nimue, who is beside her, only watches her like the obedient servant that she is. In her heart, Nimue hoped that Gremory's hunch would give the result she hoped for. Croak. The red orb shattered easily when it came into contact with the tip of the elder glass sword's blade. As if it was extremely fragile, even though it contains extraordinary power. The essence that looked like a red mist that was previously trapped inside the orb now came out and enveloped the elder glass sword. Then a notification appeared in Clyde's vision. Weapon, Elder Glass Sword has absorbed Demon Essence, Grade A. The requirement for upgrading has been met. CO. The sword was filled with a red glow. Clyde felt an unfamiliar power enter his sword. Weapon, Elder Glass Sword, Demon Form, Grade A. The sword began to change. The blade, which was a transparent blue color, turned into a dark red color. Like fire from hell frozen with great force. The hilt that was previously plain black metal turned into a horn-like shape with a circular shape filling it. The hilt was so pitch black that it looked as if it could absorb light. It's not just the sword. The demonic power also immediately flowed into Clyde's body. He could feel a surge of new, unfamiliar power in his body. But in this condition, Clyde could not refuse any help given to him. The bluish-white lightning on his body now combines with demonic energy, making the lightning flow red and black. Clyde gritted his teeth. With this, he could have more opportunities. Even so, he still couldn't grin happily. When he looked ahead, the outer god's two hands moved faster toward him. From the two grey palms emerged two pitch-black orbs about 2 meters in diameter that looked destructive. A moment later the two black orbs shot straight at Clyde. Clyde thought he could handle the two orbs. So he shot forward instead of dodging. P-Alpha, Alpha-Dash? 1.co, M. The demon power inside him screamed according to Clyde's wishes. He advanced, getting closer until finally, he was actually in front of the two orbs. Clyde swung his elder glass sword that had gained new powers with all his might. And then, something surprising happened. The elder glass sword sliced through the two black orbs as easily as a sharp knife through butter. The two orbs shattered and then just disappeared as if they had never been there. No explosions. No shockwave or anything going on. Clyde's slash was like eliminating the existence of the orbs just like that. Clyde himself was surprised by what the sword could do after being upgraded. He stared at the dark red blade of the sword. This power is amazing. The rest of the group behind Clyde stared at Clyde in silence, astonished. What the hell did they just see? Clyde suddenly let out a burst of power that seemed to just come to him abruptly. They were shocked to see the red color that suddenly appeared around Clyde's body and how he split the attack that came straight from the outer god's palm. What just happened? Sonia asked, dumbfounded. Among them, Rodney was the first to come to his senses. It doesn't matter. He then moved towards the strange flying creature that was coming towards them. Realizing that Rodney had moved, they began to move again. Ignoring their feelings of confusion and amazement because now they had more important things to do. Clyde gets a new power, or rather releases a power he never said before. So what? Shouldn't they be used to all that after a few days of seeing it? The outer god continues descending. The remaining parts of its body were finally revealed. The outer god's head is almost like a cow's head without horns. The monster's eyes look like the eyes of a beast. The pupils are vertical and light yellow in color. Then, the outer god's mouth opened. The mouth is as bizarre as the rest of its body because it opens to 5 different sides. Each part of the mouth has its row of sharp teeth. That sight should be something that made one could go mad just by looking at it. Well, they are actually almost gone mad. But because of the power of the nightmare orb, they are still able to keep their common sense intact, even if barely. Clyde gritted his teeth and continued advancing while jumping over the part of nature that was torn from the earth to climb onto the black mist. He's getting closer. The outer god also noticed his arrival and paid full attention to him. The swarms of flying freaks were coming toward Clyde from all directions. Their large number forced Clyde to stop his advance and face them. Due to Clyde taking a break for a while, the rest of the group was able to catch up to him and started confronting the flying creature. They gathered around it and killed as many of the flying creatures as quickly as they could. Even though Clyde is still the one who kills the fastest and the most, their help is still useful to reduce his burden. They didn't say anything to each other. Just keep fighting while maintaining their footing so they don't fall. Clyde finally saw the gap between the flock of flying creatures. He bolted, leaving a trail of white and red lightning flashes behind. Asterisk Swedish. Asterisk. Krot. 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 Clyde darted while slashing the elder glass sword at the strange flying creature he saw before his eyes. Until finally, the distance between him and the outer god was really close. Burning Hand, LV10, is activated. Clyde's left hand, which was not holding the Elder Glass sword, was burned by a dark red flame. Then he created a fireball with a diameter of a meter and threw it at the outer god, trying to see how the attack would affect it. Boom! The dark red fireball exploded onto the outer god's thigh. Grrrrah! The outer god let out a sound like a creature in pain. Apparently, after the explosion subsided, Clyde could see a gaping gash on its thigh. Chapter 120 Fall. Gremory was still in her seat. Her chest moved so quickly up and down following her breath. The sweat on her face also dripped down as if water had just been splashed on her face. Although the Gremory hadn't moved far from where she was since just now. She only stood a few steps away from her chair, but the exhaustion on her body was so great. Nimue is still next to her. She didn't expect that her master would do that for Clyde, who was an ordinary human. She was even willing to use a lot of mana just to break through the Guardian's defense in a secret way to convey that message to Clyde. Nimue knew that what Gremory had just done was very dangerous. Rho Alpha D Alpha N, knew, not that Gremory, as a demon duchess, was afraid of the world masters and guardians. She was sure that if measured by strength, Gremory would have the upper hand. But the consequences if she is caught breaking the rules are major. And the consequences cannot be overcome by her power alone. There was a reason why the Celestials were so reluctant to break the rules of not interfering during the selection stage. They can only start moving after the candidates, players, finish the selection stage and arrive at the neutral zone. That was because those rules were agreed upon by all inhabitants of the All territory. They all made an oath not to break the rules after an incident. So, the weight of these rules will befall anyone who violates them with severe consequences. However, cheating will continue to occur because the Celestials want to get strong candidates. So the regulation underwent a slight change that was never discussed. That change is, they will commit interference, but not get caught. The selection stage system that Clyde was in happened to be a very bad system. So that made many Celestials able to easily infiltrate there. It was also the factor that made the selection stage so different. They can find out about Clyde's whereabouts and powers. Then compete with each other to get him. Gremory is one of the most successful of them. She has succeeded in getting Clyde to complete her personal request so that she now has a kind of bond with Clyde. The bond was enough to give her a greater chance of being able to send telepathic messages to Clyde without being noticed. Though still, she had to use a lot of mana to be able to do that. Gremory looked at Nimue with a weak smile. She realized that Nimue had been watching her with a worried look all along. Nimue, have you forgotten what you saw back then? Nimue was silent. Clyde is indeed very strong. She acknowledged that. But seeing her master go through such hardships for a human being, made her feel uncomfortable. Don't you worry. I'm not in as bad a condition as you think. I already have a little bond with him. Seeing Gremory smile as if satisfied with what she had just achieved, Nimue couldn't say anything to refute her anymore. Nimue smiled. If you say so, Your Grace. After a while, when she saw the way Gremory's eyes were glinting when she talked about Clyde, there was a feeling of irritation in Nimue's heart that she couldn't explain. Nimue just realized it now. She had never before felt any resistance to anything Gremory did, or wanted. However, why did she feel that way now? Could this be a bad premonition about Clyde? Nimue suddenly clenched her fist on the side of her body. But she immediately released her fist again before Gremory noticed it. Clyde can grin when he saw the gaping gash on the outer god's thigh. That wound looks so disgusting. The pale flesh melted and charred after being hit by Clyde's red fireball. Besides that, it turns out that the fireball has a quite surprising effect. The flames that came from the fireball didn't immediately disappear but burned the meat of the outer god's thigh. The flames were dark red and contained demonic energy that dealt terrible damage. Because the fire didn't go out for some time and instead spreads around. Seeing that, Clyde wasn't the only one who felt that there was great hope before them. The other group members were no less delighted. Realizing that now he could deal amazing damage, Clyde continued to move closer. The closer he attacks, the more damage he will inflict, right? But the challenges that will come to him will also be bigger. Clyde could feel the hateful gaze of the outer god. The outer god opened its mouth to 5 different sides. Clyde could now clearly see its throat, which looked like a bottomless abyss. Then from within the abyss, an energy shot came. The shot looked like a pitch-black pillar and headed straight for Clyde with incredible speed. P Alpha, Alpha Dash 1.co, M. Clyde with a body still covered in red lightning can dodge it properly. But he only barely evaded. His left shoulder was hit by that attack and now his dark night coat had a hole in it. Seeing that the attack could break the dark night coat's defenses and make his arm bleed, Clyde wasn't too surprised. He had already guessed that the monsters he was fighting now were completely different from all the ones he had faced before. But right now he doesn't have time to deal with the wound on his left shoulder. The outer god had returned to direct its mouth towards him. In no time, it fired that pitch-black energy again. Clyde this time moved by taking cover behind all the rubble and ruin, intending to block the outer god from seeing him. Boom! 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 The shot from the outer god's mouth created an explosion when it hit the floating ruins. Clyde ignored all that and kept going. Not long after, he was right in front of the outer god's knee. Clyde held the Eldgar glass sword with both hands and channeled his magic power into it. The power of skill, pure lightning combines with demonic power. Creates a dark red and bluish-white energy vortex on the blade of the Elder Glass sword. Clyde clenched his teeth, then stabbed as hard as he could into the outer god's knee. Asterisk. The shot hit the outer god's knee and shattered it. Clyde was unable to puncture the knee, but he managed to inflict a large gash. The outer god let out a groan of pain that seemed as if it could split the sky. Then it collapsed into the part of the earth that was still not destroyed. Boom! As soon as the outer god fell, all the ruins that had been flying toward the sky abruptly stopped. Then fell simultaneously. This incident made Clyde and all the players who were standing in ruin panicked. They lost their footing instantly and fell along with the rubble. Plus, there is rubble that will fall from above them. Fortunately, Clyde was able to quickly control himself amid this chaos. He immediately used the Elder Glass sword to split the rubble and ruin that fell from above him while watching where he would fall. Of course, it is not an easy matter. Clyde turned to the rest of the group and wondered how they were doing. He thought of coming to save them. However, it turned out that the outer god did not remain silent despite having fallen. The outer god opened its mouth again and this time instead of shooting, it let out several black orbs that shot toward Clyde. The orbs didn't attack him directly. Instead moving around Clyde as if intending to attack him from multiple sides simultaneously. Shit! Clyde can't help but curse. During this chaos, he still had to be careful so the orbs didn't hit him. Luckily, the jet black orbs didn't seem to be targeting anyone other than himself. At least that way Clyde wouldn't have to worry about the others. Clyde focused his magic power. The demonic power that was in his sword has now possessed him as well. On instinct, Clyde used that power to propel his body forward. He slashed the Elder Glass sword at all the rebel in front of him. Clyde made his way toward the outer god who was now trying to get back on his feet. The orbs shot towards him from all sides. Clyde spun around and slashed the Elder Glass sword around him. Dark red curved sword slashes shot out every time he slashed the blade and they shot towards the orbs. But unfortunately, those orbs were stronger than the orbs that Clyde had cut before. He thought he would be able to destroy the orbs but it turned out that they were still able to endure and were only pushed back a bit. That's enough to buy Clyde some time so he can move closer to the outer god. As soon as the orbs got close again, Clyde had to release another energy slash. After being hit several times, the black orbs finally shattered. Still, it's not over because from within the orbs comes the mini form of the outer god. You gotta be fucking kidding me.